Hello and welcome to the Armor's Fix. My name is Kyle, and today we have Christopher Whitcomb on. Christopher went into the FBI, later went on to FBI HRT, which is the hostage rescue team that operates worldwide. He has some very interesting stories there. He's lived a very interesting life. Beyond that, went into some other private contracting work and all kinds of interesting things. He's definitely a guy I'll probably bring back again in the future. The biggest things you probably are going to want to check out is the fact that he was an HRT sniper during Ruby Ridge and Waco. Some controversial material out there. We see a lot on the civilian side, so here's a little bit more perspective on the government view of things and his personal accounts. Without further ado, Christopher Whitcomb. How we doing, Chris?
Great, Kyle. Good to see you, man.
You as well. It's awesome having you here. I guess here through the Corona version
Yeah.
of here.
Yeah, we're distance, social distance, right?
Yeah, well, it looks like by the wood look there that you're probably out in the middle of nowhere in an awesome place on your own.
Yeah, I've got a ranch in Montana, and I think it's the best place I've ever been. It's up in the mountains. It's pretty spectacular. So if you got to ride this thing out someplace, this is the place to do it.
That's a good point. That's
a lot
a
of
good
good
point.
people in Montana, too.
Yeah, I moved from more of kind of in the country to in the middle of the city, but quiet neighborhood, just a lot of people walking.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of get away from people now. I got horses and cows and lots and lots and lots of stuff you want to shoot, but not a lot of people. Well, sometimes you want to shoot people too, I suppose, right? Yeah.
That's part of the mix, I guess. So what got you into, I guess, beginning before the FBI, what put you in interest in that direction?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've thought about it many times. I didn't really start out wanting to be an FBI agent. I wasn't that kid when I grew up. I wanted to be a cop or a firefighter or something like that. I wanted to write books and make a living. Doing that, I wanted to be Ernest Hemingway, I guess. But part of that mindset was literary figures, and one of them was Holden Caulfield, The Catcher in the Rye. So I thought I was going to stand at the edge of the cliff catching kids when they came off and save the world. So some combination of wanting to be a writer and wanting to save the world. Somehow I ended up in the FBI, and from there I ended up on HRT.
Very cool. So what was it like going through academy and stuff and getting all that going?
Well, it's a little bit different than when I went in a long time ago. I won't even go that far back, but when I went through, it was about 16 weeks. Now it's almost 19, I think. But it's a little different. You go to Quantico, Virginia. I lived in Washington, D.C. I was a speechwriter on Capitol Hill. So it's not like I came out of the military, which is where most people go in, certainly to HRT. A lot of them at that time came from the military into the FBI as well. But I worked as a speechwriter on Capitol Hill. I got into the FBI after about 13 months. The application process is pretty rigorous, as you might imagine. And I went down to Quantico, and you spend 16 weeks. It looks like a community college. It's dormitories, classrooms, and it has become really a remarkable facility now. The FBI laboratory is there. The hostage rescue team compound is there. It's within the Quantico military, the Marine Corps military base, and it's a great place to spend a career. But I went to the academy for 16 weeks. Week 10, they give you your orders. They send you anywhere in the United States. You have no say, and they sent me to Kansas City.
And what were your thoughts of that?
So there's this tradition when you join the FBI and you go through the academy, they have an attrition, as you might imagine. So they usually start out somewhere around 40 people. And by week 10, let's say it's 30, 35 people left. I think there was something around that, 35 people. You all sit in this classroom. And the tradition is you walk up to the front of the room, you say, this is where I think I'm going to go. This is where I want to go. They give you an envelope. You open it in front of the class, and it's your orders. And I remember saying, I thought I was going to go to New York. I wanted to go to, I don't even know where, maybe Texas or something. And I got Kansas City. And growing up on the East Coast, my first reaction is, where the hell is Kansas City? I didn't even know where it was. And it ended up being great. I mean, it was Kansas City field office. Springfield, Missouri is an RA, a resident agency, a satellite office, and I ended up in Springfield. Went to Kansas City, got in a shootout my very first day on the job. 9 o'clock in the morning, day one, show up, get a cup of coffee. I'm taking a leak at the urinal, and this guy comes in and says, hey, kid, we got a robbery, or we got a hostage situation. And that was Kansas City. About 2 weeks after that, they sent me to the satellite office in Springfield, and that ended up being my first 4 years in the FBI.
That's crazy. So you had an OIS in your first day.
Day one, man, 10 o'clock in the morning. Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Wow. So court process and everything, was that something that got drug out a lot for you? Or is it pretty simple back then?
No, it was simple, relatively speaking. I think it was simple, but that was not the only one, and others were worse. But yeah, there's no issue at all.
Right on. And so you were in Kansas City and in Springfield?
Well, Kansas City is the field office, and the way the FBI works, they have, I think at the time, was 56 offices around the country. Everybody knows the big city offices, obviously, but a lot of the FBI's run in rural offices called resident agencies, and that's what it was. So I think Springfield at the time, we had 6 agents and 2 clerical staff, and we would go to Kansas City for a file review once a month or something, but we ran from Springfield. And I'll tell you, when I went to Springfield, Missouri, I could not believe how much crime was down there. I mean, we were going all the time, and it was a blast. It was bank robberies and fugitives. So you get a bank robbery usually on a Friday afternoon when you want to go home, but I spent my first 4 years chasing what we called UFAPs, which is an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, where the feds go interstate to chase local fugitives. So we'd go arrest somebody, hand them over to the locals. There's no paperwork. There's no nothing. It was great. It was the best job in the FBI, if you ask me.
Yeah, no, that's not bad at all. Yeah, so I read your book, Cold Zero, and you've written more than that. That's the only one I've read currently, and that's one I just finished here recently. So you talked a lot about that, like chasing down robberies and stuff here in the area, and some of that working with did you grow up in DC, or is that just kind of where you were when you first started on this stuff?
No, I grew up in New Hampshire, went to college in upstate New York. Then I moved to California, lived south of LA for a while. And then I went to, where did I go after that? The Berkshires of Massachusetts. I started out as a high school English teacher, of all things. And I went from there to a newspaper, became a newspaper reporter. Then I got hired from the newspaper to go to DC and write speeches. So born and raised in New Hampshire, ended up in Washington, DC, and went from that job in DC to the FBI.
Right. And so what was that like working in Springfield rural areas after spending a lot of time around the cities?
Well, I'd had experience both. I grew up in a town, I don't know how many people, maybe, I don't know, 200 people, something. I mean, it was a very, very small town, got bused to school. But ironically, it produced, I think I was the 5th FBI agent to come out of Franconia, New Hampshire, including an assistant director. I wrote about this in a book, I think, but one of the guys that worked for my dad ran a ski area, and one of the guys that worked for my dad shot and killed the assistant director of the FBI, who was from Franconia, home on vacation, and he shot him in a hunting accident. So one of my earliest memories was the FBI coming to town to interview my dad about this guy that had shot his boss. So it was an unusual thing growing up in a small town with access to the FBI. And it was probably a formative memory, I would guess, looking back on it now.
Yeah.
Great place to grow up. And it helped down the line. I mean, I spent my entire youth outdoors. And, guys in that world spend a lot of time outdoors. I think it helped me a lot later in life in that chosen profession.
So being a federal agent, you work a lot with local law enforcement and everything. Can maybe discuss some of the differences between working with more of the city law enforcement locals versus county and some of the smaller counties and surrounding areas that you worked with some of the bank robberies?
Yeah, that's a great distinction. A lot of people don't, I'm sure they understand it, they don't think much about it, but local, state, and federal law enforcement are very different. For example, murder is, in most cases, not a federal crime. So I worked a couple murder cases, but they're on government reservations because outside Springfield, as you know, is Fort Leonard Wood. So I would work murder cases if they involved a federal aspect, which was the military reservation. But it was great, and I thought many times that I would have been a better cop than an FBI agent because I loved that life. I loved the guys, and in Missouri, many of those rural counties, you're on your own. So whereas in a city, you might work one case with 20 guys for 2 years. In Springfield, Missouri, and the surrounding counties, you might work 40 cases by yourself the entire time. So the diversity of the casework was fantastic. And that's, that's one of the interesting thing about FBI agents that people don't talk about is you're kind of like a small business person. I mean, you show up in a community and you get some crime over the transom. Somebody walks in the door and says, hey, I saw this or the other thing. Many of those you have to come up with yourself. So you build informants, you talk to people, and you build cases. Working in Springfield, I had rural county. Some of my drives were 2 hours away. So I oftentimes would go out by myself 2 hours to arrest somebody that was wanted for murder in another state. So if not for the locals, if not for the sheriff's departments and the 1- and 2-man departments in some of these small towns in Missouri, I would have been on my own. And I think you probably read in the book that I wrote, I would have been dead a couple times as well. So I have enormous respect for the law enforcement officers, state and local officers who work these rural areas because they're on their own. They never know what they're going to get. It's incredibly dangerous. My first week on the job, I think I went to 2 separate funerals, one for a state trooper and one for a sheriff that had been shot and killed in 2 separate incidents. So you get out there in these rural situations and you have to, the variability of experience is crazy. I mean, you never know what you're going to get. Yeah. And one real interesting thing, when I started out, in those days, you needed more training to be a hairdresser in the state of Missouri than you needed to be a law enforcement officer. And I would go out to these rural departments, and the only thing that they would get as a police officer was a code bar. They'd get a light for their car. They had to supply their own guns. They had to supply their own ammunition. They had to supply almost everything. I remember I had a sheriff who lost the re-election. I think it was in Lebanon, but it was not far out of Springfield, lost the election. And when he left, he took everything with him, including the desks, all the files. He took some of the evidence. He just took everything. And he said, hey, it's mine. I paid for all this stuff. And he kind of had a point. Yeah. But it was, I don't know what the Wild West was like, but when I got out there, it was pretty much the Wild West.
Right.
You made it up and you went along.
See, I first got in LA at around 2007, and I started one of those small counties as Stone County down where Silver Dollar City area. And so there's a lot of times where you're the only guy who's south or north of the county, and that's a long stretched out county that kind of staggers down, and you're back up, like you said, it can be 27 to 38 minutes away, and that's running code across county. And my first night was a shots fired call after a pursuit ending in shots fired, and it's like, what is that? Right. Talking like
Academy, man.
Yeah, talking with city officers, like I spent 3 years living out in Los Angeles myself, and those guys are like, oh, hell no, I would never go do that. And then the guys, same thing with the county, are like, oh, I never want to work the city. It's so wild how neither of them, they both see each other's side as like that's too scary, that's not for me. So pretty wild.
It's funny, you talk about Stone County. Way back in the day when I was down there, the sheriff's name was Buff Lamb, who was a heroic guy. I mean, this guy is incredible. But he didn't read or write, so his wife would come with him all the time to handle the paperwork. And he was an iconic figure at the time. There's a very funny story, a famous story about him pulling over a bunch of bikers. And it may have been Angels, but I think it was probably Galloping Goose, who was, they shot this state trooper that I was talking about, Jimmy Linegar, when I first got there. They killed a lot of people in the 80s and 90s. It was a pretty rough gang. But anyway, he pulled them over going into Stone County, big line of Goose or Angels or Pagans, whoever it was at the time. And he goes up to the road sergeant and says, looks him over. There's a little standoff, he pulls somebody over, a line of bikers, and there's a little moment, and he looks at him and he goes, nice hog. And it kind of diffused the situation a little bit. And the guy goes, yeah, I built it myself. Buff Lamb looks at him and goes, I'm not talking about the motorcycle. I'm talking about the chick on the back. So, if you're going to pick a fight like that, that tells you all you need to know about your days in Stone County. Those guys had balls like tough guys.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a different place. I remember too, first time showing up, having a mic wired to my ear, and my FTO is like, why you got that in your ear? It's like, I don't know. I guess the people can't hear. And he was like, no, down here, that's not how we play. We want them to hear what they get a call back when they get a warrant. Take that crap off your uniform.
Yeah, that's right.
So we ran open mics. So if that guy, if he heard he's got a mic, he's either going to run or fight. So
yeah, that's exactly right.
different place, but it's a pretty sweet place to start too. Being with the lake, you got all that different community, people from all over the place coming to vacation homes, so you see pretty much every dynamic there.
Yeah, I really do.
But yeah, so I guess yeah. So leading in from that, you're at the Springfield office and everything, chasing bank robbers and all that good stuff. Anything wild there?
I spent most of my time on two guys. Their name was Hankins. I don't know if I guess we can talk names, right? But they were their MO for bank robberies is to walk up to the front door, blow it up with a 12 gauge, walk in the door, and then rob it. A lot of people carry a gun into a bank. Most don't make an entrance by blowing the door open.
Right.
So they were pretty tough guys, and they made a great investigation. They robbed a lot of banks. It was tough finding them, and coming into law enforcement and getting a case like that to work was really something else. So I got really lucky there, but I had a little bit of everything. I mean, all the experiences that you talk about or hear about in the academy, I got virtually all of them. Like the vertical coffin for one thing. You go in a door, you want to get out of the door immediately, right? And I remember that one of the first gigs I did, walking in a front door, I'm backlit, I'm looking into a dark room. I hear a voice. I see a guy in a chair. I take a step inside, and he looked very odd in this chair. It's kind of a lazy boy, an overstuffed lazy boy. And I take a step closer, and it looks kind of weird. He has an odd head to get a little bit closer. And there was a person behind him in the chair pointing a long gun over his shoulder at me standing in the doorway. That was the last time I stood in the doorway. So they tell you things in the academy. When you see them, as you well know, when you see them in person, it changes your attitude pretty quickly. But yeah. I mean, so many things. I don't know. Everything from one of the local sheriffs. This is to give you an idea of what it was like talking about the Wild West. I used to go out to one of the small communities, have lunch with the sheriff once a month, see what was going on. And we would go to the same restaurant every day, and there were more horses tied up outside than there were cars. Yeah. So guys ride in from the fields. It's still a cowboy town. So you'd have that. Somebody gave me a tarantula once in a thing that fell off my seat and got loose in the car. You have every kind of firearm involved situation you could possibly imagine. We had Colts. We had that crazy story you maybe read in the book where a woman came in. People walk into FBI offices and say they have crimes. A woman came in and said that aliens had inserted a device in her that put her in a state of constant orgasm, right? So you're sitting in a field office talking to people that just say things that you just can't even.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody has a reference base for some of the stuff that happens. So you get everything. I mean, you get the violence, you get the crazy crimes, you get the wild experiences. It was a spectacular 4 years of law enforcement, and met lifelong friends in the local and state agencies for whom I have unbelievable respect. I think the FBI, you talk about the FBI. The FBI oftentimes, and I don't mean to demean it, but the FBI oftentimes works very large, complex investigations, but they involve bank accounts, or they involve cartels, not street drugs. They involve much larger things that may not be interesting. I know lots of FBI agents who never carried a gun, or they keep it in their car, or they didn't pay attention. It's more of a cerebral job, I think, for the most part. But you have a percentage that get out and have some pretty crazy experiences as well. But the local and state guys on the ground all the time, it's absolutely incredible what many of them do and how well they do it.
Yeah. You mentioned the not carrying with that. It's kind of funny. A buddy of mine always laughed when looking at federal jobs and everything, because a lot of them, it's almost like a reminder. Hey, just so you know, you are going to be required to carry a gun if you take this job. Like, they're constantly poking people. Like, you may be just doing this as kind of a paper pusher or whatever, but you're going to need a gun on you too. And always thought that was interesting. Yeah. But yeah. So HRT, is that like invite only, or is that something you put in for? How does that work? How'd you get in?
I got in because you get at the time you join the FBI, they send you someplace you have no say. Then they have a change over time. It varies over it varies over time, but they change your orders after a certain amount of time in one office. So in my case, after 4 years in Springfield, Missouri, they said you're going to get transferred, and at that time you were either going to LA or New York. FBI agents make the same amount of money in Springfield, Missouri as they made in LA or in New York at the time, right? And it wasn't bad in Springfield. It would have sucked in New York or in LA.
So they didn't do that, like the percentage bonus based on location or anything like they do now?
Not at that time.
Wow.
No, they didn't. So it was bad duty. I didn't want to go to one of those places. And I married and had 2 kids. It would have been a bit of a hardship. So anyway, when I was at the academy, I'd seen these guys in green flight suits in the gym flying around in helicopters. At the time, even though we were all in the same grounds at the academy in the Marine Corps base, not many people knew about HRT. Not many people knew what they did or how they were used or anything else. So it was a bit of a mystery, even in the FBI. So I found out that you could apply. They have a selection once a year, and which we can talk about maybe a little bit later, which is based on Delta Combat Applications Group, whatever you want to call them.
Right.
And most people don't realize when the federal government, when the Army stood up that unit, those guys went through the FBI Academy undercover. Those plank holders went through the FBI Academy to learn SWAT tactics, because now they're better known now for Iraq and Afghanistan tours of military operations. At that time, they were a counterterrorism team, and they invented a new type of interaction, close quarter battle, fast roping, all those things that we take for granted now. They invented those things. So they melded special military techniques coming out of special forces and Rangers, and they created these techniques out of the SWAT community. And a lot of those guys all of them went through the FBI Academy undercovers, from what I understand. So when HRT started up, Delta made that team in their image. So there was a back and forth. So anyway, I knew about HRT from my time at the Academy, found out they had a selection once a year, like Delta, and anybody can apply, any field agent can apply if he or she has the right recommendation. There's a whatever to get in. So I think it was 70 something people applied the year, my selection year, and I think they invited, I don't know, maybe 35, maybe they invited half those guys or something like that. And then there's an attrition while you go through the selection process. So I tried out, I made the team, and that was that.
How long were the tryouts?
The tryout the selection is 2 weeks long. Okay. You get there Sunday night. They wake you up at 4:00 in Monday morning. Selection lasts 2 weeks. If you make it through the selection, if you make it through the 2 weeks without getting hurt or tapping out, then they pick from that group. Sometimes they pick 10 guys a year. Sometimes they pick 1 guy. I think there have been years where guys have gone through, 35 guys have started, and they picked 1 or 2 guys. Wow. So you just never know. A bit of it is luck. I suppose that's part of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, after 4 years in Springfield, Missouri, I went back for selection in March. I made the team. Then they give you orders back to Quantico. You go back and you live in a hotel for, they call it NOTS, New Operator Training School. I think NOTS lasted maybe 6 months. So you train every day. Your family goes back and lives in a hotel. So we lived 4 of us lived in a 1-room hotel.
Wow.
For 6 months, which was not hard on me because I was having a ball learning the job, but it was tough on everybody else. The kids and my wife, was pretty tough on them.
Yeah.
So that's the process. You go back, you go through NOTS, and then you go through specialized training. I went through NOTS and then went to Scout Sniper School. At the time, it was the Marines. So I've never served in the military, but I've been to many of the military schools. In that case, I went through the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, and it was not an executive course. You go through with the guys and pass that, which is a remarkable school. Absolutely incredible.
Very cool. And how often, once you're in with a HRT, do they kind of put people random places around the U.S., or you're basically just hanging out, staying at Quantico? And how often how many things a year or month did you guys engage in?
Yeah, that's one thing I'd really love to talk about. HRT is very poorly understood, and even though I wrote that book 20 years ago, they went silent after that. Very misunderstood, but a remarkable organization, primarily for this reason. In the 1980s, 70s, from the Munich Olympics in 1976, which some people may remember was one of the first really big hostage situations in the world. The Israeli athletes were taken hostage and ultimately killed. And the United States government said, we've got to have some kind of a mechanism to fight terrorism, thus the birth of counterterrorism teams. Started out with Army, then the Navy wanted a group, so SEAL Team 6 or Dev Group came up. Next, Dick Marchenko and all those guys. First, Charlie Beckworth at Delta, then they had the Iranian desert debacle, Desert One.
Eagle Claw?
Yeah, Eagle. Yeah, maybe it was Eagle Claw. Anyway, I knew a couple of those guys, including the one guy they left behind. That's another story entirely, but it was pretty remarkable. And this is an interesting aspect of the story. I went to my junior year in college. I went to school in London, and I lived near a place called Prince's Gate. Prince's Gate was the first application of the British 22nd SAS, where they went into a U.S. embassy at Prince's Gate and killed everybody, killed all the bad guys, including one who got out and they took him back in and killed him. And I watched it. I sat there and watched the whole thing go down. And then ironically, years later, ended up training with those guys in Hereford. So the counterterrorism community in the late 70s started with Delta, pioneered what we now take for granted. They invented this, the 22nd SAS, the GSG-9, the Germans, and everybody has a group now. Right. But it was a fascinating time because they created this counterterrorism idea. It was very secretive. I mean, when I started on HRT, fast roping was classified. I mean, can you imagine that?
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you literally couldn't talk about it. It was classified, top secret. But anyway, so started with the Army, then the Navy, because of the rivalry between the branches of the military. The Navy wanted a group. Marchenko stood up Dev Group. And in 1981, I guess, the United States was getting ready for the Olympic Games in LA, didn't want to have a Munich, obviously, which at the time was only 6 years earlier and 5 years earlier. So they said, what are we going to do? So there's a famous story of William Webster, who was the Attorney General at the time, as the US government put the plan together for the Olympics. Webster went down to Fort Bragg and he watched a demo from Delta. They put the thing together, helicopters, flashbangs, the whole thing that we talk about now. And he said, well, that's great, but the only thing I don't see is handcuffs. Where are your handcuffs? And one of the Delta operators very famously looked at him and said, what handcuffs? We give them all two right here. And which happened. I mean, it's a famous story, but it happened. And then the US government stood back and said, look, we've got to do something different. There's a law called the Posse Comitatus, which you may have talked about it before on your show, which prohibits the military from using prohibits the US government from using the military in civilian law enforcement. In the 1980s and the 1990s, terrorism was considered law enforcement. So if we went after somebody, and at the time, you got to remember, we know bin Laden and we know ISIS. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, terrorism was a day-to-day occurrence. Aircraft hijackings, bombings, kidnappings. When 9/11 happened, the United States government designated 66 different terrorist organizations. And we have a meeting every morning and talk about which ones we were chasing. So anyway, William Webster went to Fort Bragg. They said, we give them all two right here. He said, we can't do that. We've got to stand up an equivalent unit on the civilian side, which would have been civilian law enforcement. That's how HRT was born. Right. So because the FBI helped Delta get started, Delta helped HRT. So HRT, Delta, and SEAL Team 6 have somewhat equivalent missions that's changed over the last 30 years, but very similar. But HRT and Delta are not at all like SEAL Team 6. They're very different in terms of how they're put together, how they work, the organizations, the mechanism. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They're Tier 1 assets. They're remarkable at what they do, but they've had, over time, very different missions within the counterterrorism realm. So anyway, they stood up HRT, started in 1983. And many people think HRT works domestically exclusively, and it's just, not only is it not true, it's almost the opposite. I wrote about in that book that you were talking about, Cold Zero, which is an old antique of a book, but historic now, I think, because of the beginnings. But people don't realize we worked much more overseas, and all the black operations that the U.S. government did at the time, renditions, we talk about renditions, HRT did every rendition the U.S. government's ever done through 9/11, including the first one, which was a guy named Fawaz Yunus, who was a hijacker, took refuge in Lebanon, became a drug dealer, and 2 CIA officers in bikinis lured him on a boat with an FBI agent, lured him in a boat off into international waters off the coast of Beirut, and HRT guys dragged in off a ship over the horizon and snatched him off that boat. And there were some remarkable missions, and that was in 1986, long before anybody had ever heard of renditions. Yeah. And HRT did every single one of those gigs. If it happened, if there were a terrorist application and it involved any mechanism overseas, at least to the best of my knowledge, HRT did pretty much all of those. Delta and 6 are world-class, remarkable, stunning organizations. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anything to diminish that. It's just the mission prior to 9/11, the mission was a little bit different because terrorism was considered law enforcement. 9/11, of course, turned it military.
Yeah, and I guess now we're seeing a lot more kill or capture, and back then the objective was more capture.
Yeah, I think the objective back then was more capture, but as you know, objectives sometimes change on a door breach, right? So, right. Yeah. It was just different because you know what's crazy, Kyle? Back then it was still secret. Now everybody knows everything within 10 minutes, whether the government leaks it or whether guys talk about it or whatever. But there are so many movies and television shows, some of them very well done, but people have a great deal of information about that community through everything you can get online. I mean, there aren't that many secrets. In those days, it was secret, man. Yeah. And it was even within the FBI. I remember one time, the FBI is a bureaucracy. Most people work a career to work their way up, and it's naturally doing any organization. But HRT was a world unto itself. Nobody ever came down from headquarters. They never checked and saw what we were doing because they didn't want to get aligned with something that might jeopardize their career. And I remember somebody decided they had to come down and figure out what we were doing and how we were doing it. And nobody had ever checked on us. So they accused us of losing a helicopter. They accused us of losing, several hundred guns, weapons of different types. And then they finally started asking questions, got scared and went away. And that was the last I knew about it. So it was secretive even within the FBI.
Yeah. So did anything happen with that? Missing a helicopter and guns?
I'm sure somebody called somebody. We didn't lose a helicopter. We might have.
Right. It's all speculation.
Might have crashed it or something. Yeah. No, it was just the record. We didn't keep records. I think bureaucracies to a certain point, and this was very much the same in the Navy and the Army. When the Army and Navy stood up those teams, 6 and Delta, when they stood up those teams, it was career suicide to join those teams. I mean, it was a very special community. There was a great deal of animosity within the General Army or the larger Navy, and it was great work. It was a remarkable job, and it was great to be part of, but it was very unlikely you're going to get promotions. And then over time, it became a career path, and you could work your way up. But when I started at HRT, in terms of rank, we only had 2 supervisors, and it was 50 shooters, a very, very small administrative office, and a couple supervisors, and that was it. It was very fast, very small, and anti-bureaucratic. Different world, much freer. Yeah, it was crazy back then.
That's, I think, a big part of why I've liked smaller agencies and working with them is just there's so much more freedom in it, and I've always liked that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so were you doing stuff randomly kind of around the world and everything in early stages of HRT once you're full-blown certified and ready to kick doors and do all the good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And it happens quickly because you go through the academy and they teach you various things about being a cop, right? As you well know. Few of those things really have real-world application. You join a team you join a counterterrorism team. At the time, there were only 3. This is before Ground Branch, before anybody else. And because we made this stuff up, there was no academy. I mean, we taught ourselves. So we would go, like, for example, HRT guys would go to BUDS, or we'd go to SEAL team school, we'd go to Army jump school, or we'd go to all the military schools because it didn't exist anywhere else.
Right.
I mean, even so many of the guys like the combat shooters or all the hand-to-hand fighting, the MMA guys, all of those are part of the training program now. And but they weren't then. I mean, we were kind of trying to invent that stuff. So we would lean on each other. So the Army or the Navy or international groups, they would come to Quantico to our compound and train, or we'd go to theirs around the world. And we'll talk about it a little bit more. But at that time, there were only 3 shoot houses in the United States. Well, no, there were 4 really. There's one at Bragg, there was one at Dam Neck, there's one at Quantico, and then the CIA had one at the farm. And they had a track and you could shoot off. And they had one at Harvey Point too, but I don't think we used it then. I think it was after the fact. But anyway, it was a very limited mechanism. And we had an aircraft facility at Davis-Monthan in Tucson. And we had, I think we had 6 aircraft, 2 for Delta, 2 for Six, and 2 for us. But they were all on the same stretch of ground right there. So it was a very small world, very small training community, and we would just travel back and forth. So we'd go to Bragg would come to us, Six would go to Camp Perry, just trading off to get a different look. So the operations what I'm getting to is that you would train in this very limited environment, and then all of a sudden somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, go get on a G4 on a private plane and fly to Gander, Newfoundland for gas, and then you fly to Ireland for gas, and you fly to Luxembourg for gas, and then you fly to Yemen, and you get off with, you get on, well, I'm trying to tell too many stories, I think, but just to give you an idea of what the first one was like, the first time I ever did one of these gigs, we had a 7-man sniper team. All the sniper teams were about 7 guys. And my team leader tapped me on the shoulder and he said, leave your creds and your gun in your desk and come with me. We drove to a local municipal airport and a G4 landed. I got on a G4. There were 7 of us on the plane. For some reason, there were usually 7 people on the plane. So you usually have a CIA case officer. You'd have 1 or 2 comms guys, are usually some kind of a sergeant in the Air Force because NSA would run the comms, and NSA is administered by the Air Force. So you'd have a couple sergeants. Then you'd have a couple HRT guys, maybe 1 or 2 others. But you wouldn't know who anybody was, and nobody would say anything. So if I met you on one of those planes, I wouldn't ask you who you were or where you were from, and you would tell me your name is Jim, and I'd say, okay, whatever, and you go do those. So it was very confusing because there were no rules. So you join a law enforcement organization, and it was very, very different, different experience. And you put these teams together, you fly into a foreign country, you do these gigs, and you kind of make it up as you go along. So it was fascinating because we invented that process, and they don't teach about that in any academy. So it was a fascinating time in terms of those overseas operations. So it was kind of interesting in my years because I joined HRT and we went straight to Talladega, Alabama for prison riots, which we broke into a maximum security prison where they were murdering hostages. That was a really remarkable mission by itself. And then right after that, that was, I think, the first weekend I came on the team, and then came out of BUD/S. And then we went to Ruby Ridge in Waco in rapid succession. And we all know those things were pretty controversial at the time as well. So I ended up doing a lot domestically, and then we went overseas.
Yeah. So, you bring up Ruby Ridge. How long had you been on? When did you join team? I'm sorry, on the HRT?
1991.
91.
Yeah, so I became operational in, I don't know, sometime around November, December, something like that, I think in 91, after BUD/S. So you spend 6 months on BUD/S, and then, you spend 6 months on going through NOTS, New Operator Training School. So many acronyms, you lose track sometimes. And then you go to BUD/S, or you go to the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, or you go to the jump school. You go to those schools after you complete BUD/S, depending on your specialty. So I got on the team, went to Talladega, then Ruby Ridge and Waco came with fairly rapid succession after that.
So let's talk about Ruby Ridge. And I guess another element here that I feel like people should know is it seems like there was a heavy amount of compartmentalization for you guys on the ground. Your info, in situations like this, you're told specific things and you do your job accordingly. So I think a lot of people do see this a little unfairly towards the government side and not understanding where things have been. So obviously, some people won't enjoy hearing this stuff, other people will. And I just want an opportunity for you guys to discuss a little bit more of your side and more of your personal accounts of the situation for Ruby and Waco.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's great to be able to tell my side of it. I look at it differently than a lot of people. I don't really have a strong position. I know how controversial it is. I've done documentaries. I've talked to so many people over time. And I know people feel very strongly about it one way or another. And look, I don't have a position. All I can do is tell you what I did while I was there, and people can look at it any way they want. I think that Randy Weaver and his family certainly have a valid perspective in hating the federal government. I mean, I understand, and I can tell you a lot of different personal elements of this thing. So I don't have a perspective that what we did was right or wrong or otherwise. It's just what happened. But I think the underlying feature is this. At that time, the world was a very different place. And at that time, the federal government was literally making a transition from the old school law enforcement where they carried a revolver and wore a fedora, like the old FBI stories that you see about, and what we now take for granted as modern law enforcement. At the time, it was a very different world. So this is exactly what happened in Ruby Ridge, for example. We trained in Quantico, and we spent a lot of time there. And you'd get rumors. You'd do CQB training in the morning, then you go do defensive tactics. You fight at lunch, and then you go back and maybe do helicopter operations in the afternoon, right? But you're in the compound practicing, and then you always want work. It's like being on a fire department. You want the call out, right? And our call was, you get a rumor, then the teams would mobilize, which means you go back and you pack your gear, and they would tell you what environment, because we'd go anywhere. So they'd say it's a desert environment, or it's a winter environment, or we're going to the mountains, or it's snow, or we're going to the beach, or it's a maritime operation. And because you got to do a little bit of prep, right? So we were supposed to be wheels up in 2 hours from notification, which is a quick turnaround. So I forget what day it was, someday weekday, and the word goes out. We go back, we put our gear together, put together the package, and at the time it was moderate weather, mountainous terrain, put together a rural camo package. I was a sniper. And then we got deployed. We jump in the vehicles and we drive from Quantico, Virginia to our aircraft deployment. We had a contract, and we jump on a plane. We flew to Spokane, Washington, I think it was, and then we drove from there to Ruby Ridge, to the location, with everything that we had. We had little birds. We put the helicopters on there. We load our box trucks, all of our gear. We were palletized and ready to go. We get there, drive out, and deploy immediately up to the cabin, because at that time there was no perimeter. So what happened is the marshals went up, or ATF went up. They engaged the dog. I have no idea what happened in terms of who shot Sammy Weaver, who shot first, who shot second. I know there was a gunfight. I know there was death on both sides. Excuse me. I knew at the time that there was a gunfight. There was death on both sides. And you got to remember, HRT was not an arbiter. We were not a SWAT team. We didn't do investigations. When there was no other option left, that's why they sent us. So we went as a backstop. And at that point, because the ATF had gotten in the shootout, the federal government determined that we were going to resolve it. So we got on scene, been up all night long. It's cold, rainy. We were told very limited information, but I think it's quite widely known now that. Whoops, did I lose you?
Nope.
I lost something here. Stand by for 1 second.
Yeah, I still got you.
On my son's computer, and I have no clue what I just did or
If you want, what I can do is end call and call you right back.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Okay.
So we flew from Quantico, Spokane, Washington. We drive out. It was overnight, so we get there in the afternoon. Nobody had slept. It's pouring rain. I think it was about 33 degrees. So it is a cold, hanging rain, very low cloud cover. And we have a very basic idea of where the cabin is and what the terrain is, and some idea of what happened. But the briefing was terrible. I mean, we really didn't have much information at all. We knew that he was armed and dangerous, obviously been in a shootout. We knew he had special forces training, so we knew he was capable. We knew that he was up on that mountain somewhere, which was in the clouds. And we knew that we had to go right now because there was no containment. For all we knew, he was coming at us. We had no idea where Randy Weaver, Kevin Harris, or the family were at all. So we deployed, the sniper element deployed. We hiked up, we got into position. I lay down behind my scope. There were all the sniper positions were 2 except mine, which was 3. And then all hell broke loose. I mean, I literally laid down in my hide. I constructed a hide, lay on a boulder slab that was high above, I don't know, I said in the book, but roughly 200 yards away, 150 yards away, something like that. And they came running out of the cabin, they being 2 males and a female, came running out of the cabin carrying shoulder weapons, and they came running straight at us. So I have, to this day, I don't know why. Some say they heard a cab, or they heard a helicopter. Some say they heard people. I don't know what precipitated the assault, but my personal perspective, arriving on scene after hiking up there, trekking up there, which took a long time, soaking wet, freezing cold, can't see through your scope because your optics are all screwed up with condensation, as you imagine. Radio comms didn't work very well. They never do. It was confusing. It was a shit show. And then within a very, very short period of time, minutes of when I lay down behind my scope and start setting up fields of fire and trying to come up with some kind of a reporting mechanism, they come running out of the cabin right at us. So my assumption, everybody makes their own assumption, my assumption is they were attacking us and that they were going to get in the wood line, and then we had a problem. So
now, in Randy Weaver's background, he had a special forces background, didn't he?
Randy had a special forces background. We knew some of that at the time, but our briefing was so limited and we had so little information on anything, terrain, weapons, what had happened in the shootout. I think when we first got there, we thought somebody was still pinned down, but it was not ideal under any circumstances.
How old were you?
I was, 30 years old, I guess. Yeah. 31. It's 31 years old. It's 31. And so with the training and with operations, with officer-involved shooting situations, I had a lot of experience. So I was new to HRT, but I was not new to combat by any stretch of the imagination. I fought Golden Gloves in D.C. I guess what I'm trying to say is I had quite a bit of experience. It wasn't the experience that I found confusing. It was the information we were given. Yeah. And in retrospect, all of these things, I watched all the documentaries. In retrospect, it's very easy to say, well, you did this, this, and this, and they were all wrong. I agree. Within the realm of the information you have at any given time, I think we did exactly what we should have done. And the rules of engagement have become very controversial over the time. But our supervisor, the sniper team supervisor, I won't say his name, gave the rules of engagement, and they have been, we had Senate hearings, we had a grand jury, they tried to indict us for murder. There are profound amounts of information on both sides about what happened as people make their choices. All I know is this: it was very confusing, and we went up there thinking that they had just shot federal marshals, and we were going up there to report information unless it escalated. And when we saw them come out of the cabin with shoulder weapons, running out of the cabin with shoulder weapons, at least in my estimation, that was escalation.
100%.
So then it comes down to the shot, and this is all that really matters, I think, when people talk about Ruby Ridge. And I saw just recently, I saw a documentary. Oh, it was the David Koresh Waco documentary that starts out at Ruby Ridge. And it was the most absurd thing I've ever seen in my life. It had no bearing on reality whatsoever.
Are you talking about the new Netflix one or something else?
Yes. Yeah, the
Okay,
new
so
Netflix.
the drama series.
Yes, exactly. So it's about Waco, but they start out talking about the FBI response at Ruby Ridge.
Mhm.
And it was not just ridiculous. It was absurd. I mean, it had no basis in reality in any way when it came to HRT. So it comes down to the shot, and this is the one thing I say. You can have any opinion you want about Ruby Ridge, what the FBI did, what the government did, what Randy and Vicky Weaver and Sammy, the family. I could talk about that forever. As I say, I don't have a position. I completely understand and agree with many of the things that they did. But I will say this. When it comes to the shot, which is what everybody talks about, Lon Horiuchi, and I say his name because it's been broadly printed,
Right.
Is a great guy. He was a Naval Academy graduate. He was I think he went to West Point, but he was a military academy graduate. He was a very religious guy, very spiritual guy, incredibly competent guy, quiet, kind of introspective, very, very highly thought of, not just in HRT, but in the community, and a very capable guy. And he was doing exactly what he was told to do, but maligned for years for this reason, because he ended up shooting Vicky Weaver and not Randy Weaver when he was going back in. But anybody who's fired a rifle, which is virtually every one of your viewers, understands that it's nothing but pitching a rock at very high speeds, right? It's got a trajectory. You're just launching a projectile and gravity takes over. And like a football, if you're shooting movers, you have to lead the target. If you shoot at the target, it's already gone by the time the bullet arrives. So snipers typically would shoot in two techniques. One, where you hold your cross, you try to track like you're shooting in skeet, which doesn't work well at all. Or you set your crosshairs on something they're going to run into. You calculate with mil dots when to pull the trigger, and then you meet the shot and the target come together at the same time. That's the best situation. It's like throwing a pass or any metaphor you want to use. Lon took a shot because I thought we were under attack, and I think he felt the same way. And they ran back to the cabin, and he shot Randy, but he knew where. You got to remember that a sniper is looking through a scope. You're looking through a reticle, but the entire world boils down to a very small field of view. So he set his crosshairs where he knew the target was going, which was the front door. They headed back to the cabin. So he can't see left, right, or up or down. He can see the field of view where he knows the target is going. So he set his crosshairs on the door, and the idea is you pull the trigger, the round and the target meet at the door, and it's an effective civilian law enforcement application of an open air option, a sniper shot. I thought justified in every way. I thought very well executed, and he would have hit his target between the time he pulled his trigger and the time the round hit. The door opened, and Vicky pushed the door open to allow Randy and Kevin and their daughter to run back into the cabin. So it is target, round, sniper shot, door open, all at the same time. The round goes through the door, deflects, and hits her, who was standing on the other side of the glass, through a curtain, and it hit her. So I think it's very easy for a documentary film crew 20 years after the fact to look and say, this was a tragedy. And it is a tragedy. But in realistic terms, everything went right, except that she stepped in front of the shot. And it's very difficult to explain unless you're in those situations. You're in a low-hanging fog. It is just above freezing. You've been up for 36 hours, traveled halfway around the country, climb a mountain, lie down between a sniper shot, or lie down behind your rifle. You see three people running at you with long guns in a mountainous setting after they have just engaged in a shootout with federal agents people have been killed, and you decide to engage. He shot, hit what he was aiming at. She stepped in front of the round before it hit him. So perhaps, and I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or otherwise, I'm explaining what happened. People can decide what they want from that information. But I was trying the entire time to do the exact same thing. My trigger broke at 2¼ pounds, and I probably had 2 pounds on that trigger. It was just going from tree to boulder to obstacle, and I just didn't have a shot. I was trying, as were a lot of the other guys. So I made the same decision Lon made. I tried to pull the trigger. I tried to do what I thought at the time was the right thing to do, and I didn't. So that is my perspective from what I saw. I'm leaving out a lot of details, obviously, in terms of what it was actually like to be there, but that's essentially what happened. And then you live with that after the fact. So I think I said sometime, if you're an all-star baseball player and you hit the ball one out of 3, you're 333, you're an all-star, right? Law enforcement, you don't get to make mistakes. You wear it for the rest of your life, as you so well know. And at that level, the consequences are severe. They were severe for the Weaver family. They were severe for Lon, who took the shot. They were severe for the reputation of the FBI and the federal government. Nobody won that day, but everything made sense, though nothing went right. So I respect other people's perspectives, but that's what happened.
I've not heard what you just said about the baseball batting average, and that is just such a good point. Like, those are people that people see as complete stars, absolute rock stars out there, nowhere near perfect, and law enforcement is constantly held to that expectation.
1 out of 3.
Yeah.
You get 1 out of 3 right. In my old job, if I shot 12 people in the line of duty and I missed one of them, I could easily spend 30 years in prison.
Yeah.
At that level is an incredibly thin margin for error. And it's not just sniping, we had an aircraft mission. You go on an aircraft and we would practice, train all the time and shooting down tubes, planes, trains, and automobiles, but tubular targets, subways, buses, and airplanes. And we would shoot every day in training, and we would shoot 250,000 rounds a year, 300,000 rounds a year each. In many years, I would shoot 2 barrels out of my rifle, 10, 15,000 rounds out of a sniper rifle. But I had 17 weapon systems at the time, 17. You have 50, you got crew serve, you have saws and 60s, you have all the silence weapons. We had silence 308, we had MP5 SDs. We had just tons of weapons. You shoot all the time, but we would usually, on any given day, you would frequently feel rounds going past your face when you're running CQB. So you get used to very, very, very thin tolerances. But when it comes to a sniper shot, with all the variability that goes into something like that, you can't make a mistake once, or the consequences for everybody are significant. The shooter, obviously, but certainly hitting the wrong person. I just got to tell you this one story, just as perspective. One of the early missions, HRT, an HRT sniper shot someone. It was in the 80s. It was in a place called Sperryville, Virginia. A guy kidnapped a woman and 2 small children. It was a baby, an infant, and a toddler. They were discovered in a 2-story farmhouse in Sperryville, Virginia. Long story short, the negotiations failed. He was adamant he wanted a helicopter to take him to a foreign country, and it was Cuba, someplace else, and Hawaii. He wanted to go to a foreign country, Hawaii. Called Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we were dealing with. But anyway, the long story short is he came out. HRT has its own air support, so we had our own helicopter. So you got I don't think it was a 412. I think at the time it was a Huey. But anyway, so you've got the farmhouse, you have a helicopter, and you have snipers in the wood line surrounding a field. It's a very rural property. He comes out of the house. When he came out of the house, he had the barrel of the shotgun taped to the woman's head. So he's carrying a shotgun, duct tape to her. I think it was taped to her neck. She's carrying a baby, and she had or the toddler, I think, was on her back. So she is walking with her head directly adjacent to, touching a child. So they're walking to the helicopter. So you got a helicopter with rotor wash. You've got a hostage taker who has the barrel taped to the hostage with a child directly adjacent to her head. So the sniper, the HRT sniper, had to hold his crosshairs on the child's head in order to hit her, on her head, in order to hit him when he pulled the trigger, just because they're walking into the shot, just like I was talking about at Ruby Ridge. So the helicopter had orders not to let the guy on it. So he got close to the helicopter. They threw out 2 flashbang grenades, and the helicopter pulled off. The sniper took the shot and blew the guy's head off. But when he took that shot, he was holding his crosshairs on that child. And I think many people, even your viewers, many of your viewers are very, very knowledgeable, know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of how you pull a shot. Shooting deer, anybody who's ever hunted knows exactly what I'm talking about. But when you've got to hold your crosshairs on the hostage's head when you pull the trigger, and know that they're going to and take a chance that they're going to step, they could have stopped. There are so many variables. The margin is so thin. It is a very, very difficult enterprise. So anyway, that's what happened at Ruby Ridge.
Crazy. So moving on from that, Waco was it pretty close right after Ruby?
Yeah, very close. I don't remember the dates, but they were the other way around, right? Waco was after Ruby Ridge.
That's what I was meaning. Sorry,
yeah.
I said that backwards then.
Very close, yeah.
So what? And you were on a trip somewhere, right, when you got the call for Waco?
Yeah. So like Delta 6, HRT, you have various teams within teams because you have to have absolutely any package. So you got to do tall targets. You got a high rise. You got to climb up there sometimes. So we had a climbing team. Sometimes you have to climb an elevator shaft. You got to climb the outside of the buildings. Sometimes you got to climb cliffs. So we had a climbing team. We would travel around the world climbing high angle targets. And we were climbing in Tucson, Arizona. I think we might have had a jump in Phoenix as well. But anyway, we were climbing in Tucson, and we're getting lunch. We had stopped to have lunch before the afternoon climb, and we got the call that something had happened in Waco, and nobody knew where Waco was, except one of the guys on the team who was from Waco. One of the guys on my sniper team had gone to Baylor, and he's from Waco. So anyway, we jumped on a plane. And we were the very first to arrive at Waco. Went out to the airport. There was a hangar that had put everything together. And then the entire team came in from Quantico or wherever the guys were at the time. And that's how it started. You know, I was the first on the ground, and I was literally the last guy to leave. I was the last guy out of town.
Wow.
So that's very much like Ruby Ridge. Every time we got called on a mission, it was expedient. We didn't have time to do anything. It was an emergency response. It was always a flight for the most part. You show up, you get the best information you can get, and you do the best you can with it. At that time, it was very different than Ruby Ridge because obviously it played out for a very long period of time. When we got there, the firefight was still hot. You know, I mean, guys had just been shot up. There was no perimeter again. Nobody knew what was going on, and nobody was in charge. It was complete chaos for the most part, and we tried to make some sense of it. So I ended up with 2 of my guys deployed on the roof of a house that was, I don't know, maybe I'd say probably a half a mile away or something like that, with a 50, and high winds, and we didn't know what was going on. It took a while before. Before we put a perimeter together, gathered information. And then unlike Ruby Ridge, we just ended up sitting there for a couple months. And we have always said, I've believed to this day that if they had deployed us as we were designed to be deployed and we had gone in, we could have resolved it and saved all of those people because they had been shot up. They were trying to regroup, and our specialty was to attack. And we didn't get to do that, and we know what happened.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. especially, of course, easier thought now for many people probably to agree with that several more coming out alive in that situation would be better. But that's wild.
Yeah, that was it was the exact opposite of Ruby Ridge. It just took so long and it became a grinder.
Yeah.
Then it became a war with all the different entities because negotiations were becoming very popular at the time within the law enforcement community.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I ultimately went through the negotiator school within the FBI and understood their perspective, we being HRT, were not designed to sit and wait. We were designed to be brought in, resolve the situation, and go away. Didn't work that way. We ultimately sat and became babysitters, and it was a poor application of HRT as an asset and a poor application of most of the resources that the federal government had across the board. And it was crazy. I mean, I remember sitting up there watching from a sniper position as they brought in armored vehicles and tanks on flatbed trailers from a military, I think it was Fort Hood, but it was different, man. I mean, it was a military application in a civilian law enforcement action in the United States. And I don't know of anything at the time that you could use by comparison. It was new. I mean, it was very different, and people were trying to figure out what to do, from the attorney general all the way down to the people on site. So I'm happy to answer any questions you want if you have questions about Waco. But
did you have things where command was flip-flopping on decisions, or where you guys were prepping for entry and then back off, prep for entry, back off, anything like that going on throughout that?
No, we never had that. The only application that was a little bit unusual for me was day one when we went to take the perimeter. The U.S. government writ large, the FBI and the ATF and the marshals and the police departments. I mean, there were endless numbers of agencies in the area, as you might imagine. The response was huge. Nobody really had any sense of what was going on at Mount Carmel because there was nobody on scene. There was when the shootout occurred and when ATF pulled their people back out of the marshals at Ruby Ridge and the ATF at Waco, I apologize. But when they pulled out after the shootout, they did not leave anything behind. So when we went in, we had no idea what we were going to find. So when we first went to Waco from the command post, from our holding facility at the command post, we went in Bradley fighting vehicles. And when we came out, we thought we were going into a firefight. I mean, we thought we were, making an attack on the building. Right. And as it turned out, they had pulled back within the building. So the bulkhead came down on the Bradley fighting vehicle, the armored vehicle, and we go out ready for war. So that was a different application in civilian law enforcement. And then, of course, we sat down and just ended up babysitting them for a long period of time.
So the negotiations and everything that took place, obviously there's a lot of that went on for a while. I've seen the drama series like you did on Netflix, and how they portray the negotiator. I mean, I don't know if you have thoughts or whatever to answer on that, but did you see much of that, hear much of that, or know kind of what was going on with that, or did they do an accurate portrayal of the negotiator, or do you feel like it was quite a bit different?
No, the main character in the Netflix documentary is a guy named Gary Nesner. Gary Nesner ended up being a very close friend of mine, a lifelong friend of mine. I think very, very highly of him. I didn't know him at the time, and because of the mindset, I didn't know anything about him or the negotiators, but I was a shooter, and I was there for that application. I mean, I could be politically correct, but that's just not accurate.
Right.
I mean, HRT didn't talk to people. I mean, we didn't say drop your weapon. We didn't use mirrors and smoke. And I mean, we were a different element that was new in the world at that time. And at the time, we were the only one in the world. I mean, the military, Delta and 6, had the similar application, but it was not civilian law enforcement. So right. It was a different perspective, I think, that we were going to use military tactics in that situation. But I think that when we were deployed to Waco, no one in the federal government really had a firm grip on what to do. So you had Janet Reno, the attorney general at the time, had her perspectives on the way to run the world. Bill Clinton was very different politically as president of the United States. The news media coverage, then within the FBI, perspectives within a bureaucracy. Then you have all the other agencies that got involved. But it all came down at the end to your question about the negotiators and about the use of force. If Ruby Ridge had not happened recently, I think we would have stormed the place, gotten in a hellacious shootout, and saved all the hostages, killed the bad guys and saved the hostages. I think that would have happened. But there was a reticence because of Ruby Ridge that we just couldn't do that. And I think that probably made a big difference. So, like the Netflix documentary indicated, negotiators got the handle. They ran the thing. Gary Nesner, who I don't know the actor's name, featured in the Netflix series, started running the show. And I'm not knocking negotiations. I think they're a critical part of resolving situations. You don't want people to die. You want to resolve things peacefully, if at all possible. However, in any organization, human beings ultimately feel differently about each other. And if you're a negotiator and you're talking to a bad guy day in and day out over a long period of time, and you're using empathy as a tool, and you're trying to build rapport, you're trying to stall, you stretch that out for a day, a week, a month, 2 months, you build a relationship that, in my opinion, and I've had these discussions with Gary many, many times, in my opinion, that perspective becomes something like Stockholm Syndrome, that you're trying to get the bad guy to, you're trying to get the bad guy to bond with you, and that's very difficult to prevent you from bonding with a bad guy. So you take a state, you take a New York City, you have a bank robbery, and you take an NYPD negotiator goes in, they have a specific amount of time that they're going to talk before the whatever CERT team or SWAT team, whatever we call them at any given place, make entry. It's just the way it works. They're not going to spend 2 months dealing with every situation. In a small town in the United States or in a major city, it happens every single day. Cops are doing this every single day. In Waco, because it was an international story, and then they were filming it every day, the news media, the stakes became so high, it took on a life of their own. And negotiators became the end all, the beginning and the end of that operation. So all anybody wanted to do was resolve Waco peacefully through negotiations. And I don't think I'm exaggerating. So Gary, as depicted in Netflix documentary, was very much involved. He's very engaged and tried very hard to do his best. And I have enormous respect for that. My perspective at the time was, this is ridiculous. I mean, if you could hear the stuff David Koresh was saying, you might share my perspective. I mean, he was such a con man. Anyway, I won't get into it. My perspectives on that don't matter. I give the information about what we did, not my opinions of those things.
I have dug trying to find more and more data out there that shows like actual audio recordings with the negotiation, and just hear some of that. And there's bits and pieces of it you can hear and everything. And I don't know. It's just from what I can gather, he didn't play the sweetheart angle as much as Netflix portrayed. And obviously, it wasn't really your guys' case. It was ATF who went in and did everything, and you guys were just simply coming in for a completely different application at that point. So that's the other thing I feel like where people kind of muddy the waters is like just by association, they just assume you're basically the same thing as the ATF and part of the whole problem. When they're on the Koresh side, and separating the two agencies is a very important factor. But when you were on the sniper team, where were you posted up in relation to the building?
For most of the duration of Waco, the FBI or the HRT had the perimeter, the inner perimeter, nobody else. And we had some military guys come through, as has been widely written. But we had the perimeter, and we had the front, which we called sniper positions, we called Sierra positions. So we had Sierra 1 in the front, the house that they showed in the Netflix documentary, and Sierra 2 in the back. I was in the Sierra 2 in the back. And one thing Netflix did was I was absolutely, I could not believe how accurate they were in the visual depiction of what that place looked like. Yeah. I mean, right down to his car, it was it. So that part of it was really accurate. it was an odd thing. It was that the building you saw in the documentary, and two positions, front and back, and over time we moved other units in and closed it to the east and west. But I remember so many things happened. It was a very odd run out by an organization trying to figure out what to do. And we on HRT were a tactical element designed to do one thing, but told to do something dramatically different. And my perspective was we shouldn't have been there. My perspective was they should have built a barbed wire fence around the place, talked for 30 years, and that would have been it. But it went downhill after a period of time. There was a scene to be fair, and I'll say this up front, I only watched the first episode because I was so pissed off at the way it was depicted. I just said it's absurd to watch it. I mean, it didn't make any sense. It wasn't even reasonably close. I turned it off, but there was a great scene where Koresh is standing there in the door, and it's kind of fun because I was friends with, for various reasons, Taylor Kitsch before he did that movie, which was really odd to see him in it because I had talked to him about it being there. But anyway, there was a scene where the helicopter came in. So you would see over time, we would come up with these harassment tactics. We'd play rabbits being slaughtered, and we'd play, babies crying backwards, or all these crazy things. But there were a lot of times when we would get in helicopters and we would fly 8 feet off the ground at the building and then swoop up above as we went. Harassment tactics that was supposed to destabilize them, I guess. I don't know what the perspective was there, but it became surreal. I mean, I'm a guitar player. I bought a guitar and I spent most of my time sitting around reading books and playing guitar. So you have a team like HRT sent in to babysit. It became boredom. It became ridiculous. It just became absurd to us anyway. To me, I think to most of the guys.
No, I've played around for 4 to 7 hours. I don't think I've ever gone past 8 hours, and I know how boring the first hour is in most of those cases. Yeah. So I can't imagine. Yeah. And so how many days did you spend behind glass total?
Oh, all of them. But
yeah.
There were 12-hour shifts. Well, it evolved because, it just became your way of life after a while. Day, the first day it's one thing, the first week it's something, then the first month it's something. And things, eventually became a way of life. And it changed, but ultimately they became 12-hour shifts. And at one point there might have been 24, but usually you spend 2 hours on your scope. So you'd be 2 hours on glass and then 2 hours and then, 6 hours off or something like that.
It's still a long time.
It's a long time. And when you're on, right? So you would have quadrants, and anybody who's worked in law enforcement or military snipers, you build pattern, you make pattern analysis. You become the surveillance aspect of it, really. So when they would do shifts just like we did, and they'd point rifles at us, and we'd be looking down their scope, and they'd be looking down our scopes, and it just became a day-to-day thing. But when you're on because we thought at any given time they could shoot at us as easily as we could shoot at them. So usually 2 hours on and then long times off.
When do you remember the whole Bureau of Land Management thing kicked off in Nevada with the Bundy Ranch?
Yeah.
Were you monitoring that closely at all, or wondering if that was going to be like a Waco 2.0 situation?
Yeah, I thought about a lot of those things. There have been quite a number of them, and some of them HRT's been involved in a bunch of those. I saw something the other day. What was I watching the other day? Something about it might have even been the Netflix thing. I don't even know if they said it was HRT. I think they might have said it was ATF guys up there. But many people, because they don't understand anything about HRT, really don't even know HRT does it. So a lot of times the government will tell the media that it was another agency. So HRT has been involved in many of those over time, but people think it's Marshals or ATF or DEA or some other agency. Right. But yeah, I mean, listen, any of those things could go bad. It's just, there are a lot of kooky people in the world, man. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying they do some crazy stuff. I mean, what we saw the other day with those guys going into Michigan, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying if I saw a guy in a Mohawk walk into a state capitol carrying an AR and, in a carrier with that mask around his head, I think it might have gone slightly differently if it were me. But it's America, you can do a lot of stuff in America, but you can have accidents too.
Yeah.
You never know what somebody's going to do.
Well, we had that guy here in Springfield who made national news, who threw on a chest rig and a rifle and starts walking in a Walmart. And there's this, that, and the other about everything. And it was I actually know the firefighter who was there and actually held him at gunpoint because he thought some dude. I don't know if he just thought he went in, and I've not talked to him since it. It's not like a friend or anything, or more so like acquaintances. But yeah, I worry about that guy getting sued by this kid now because he held him at gunpoint. So.
Yeah, but what do you do? I mean, he starts shooting, and he's a goat for not shooting him. He doesn't shoot him, and he gets sued because the guy has a legal right. It's a very, very confusing time in society, especially today, as you and I talk, with what's going on in the world with the virus and social interaction. It is a very confusing time, especially if you get a gun in your hand.
Yep. So, did you ever see Koresh?
Saw him almost every day. I mean, many times I had him in my crosshairs because, people go, well, what do you mean your crosshairs? Well, you're looking down a rifle scope the entire time, right? You don't have a lot. I mean, I had different optics, but that was the optic I made my observations.
It becomes your binoculars.
Yeah, it becomes the binoculars, exactly. So, yeah, many, many times, give me the finger, eating food. I mean, it was very lackadaisical after a time. It was just day in and day out. They'd sit on the windowsills, and they had their hides. They built some very professional hides. They had very good pre-Google training. I mean, I was surprised and impressed with the weapons they had, and they had 50s. They had two 50s, two Barretts, and you just get to know them after a while. Yeah. You get to see them every day, and they wave, and you wave. I didn't wave, but. So the first time I saw Koresh, he had a T-shirt on that said "God Rocks." It had a silhouette of him playing guitar, and it said "God Rocks." And
a silhouette of God or Koresh?
Well, it looked like him. I think he had a T-shirt made up, and it was a silhouette of Koresh playing guitar. At least it looked like him anyway.
Yeah.
And it said "God Rocks." But look, this is one interesting thing about Waco. I think. I've been back to Waco 4 times in the years since. And I've played in David Koresh's band, which is no longer his band, but the building burned down. It was taken over by a new pastor. It's still Mount Carmel. It's still the Branch Davidian complex in Waco, Texas. It has a new leader, and I won't go into that, but I find him to be a great guy on a personal level, religion aside. And I've gone back to make my peace, I think, and just because, for whatever reason, I went back with CBS once and did a story with CBS News, and then I went back on my own 3 times I did an HBO story once, and I've gone back and talked to people that were in there, the survivors who are still affiliated with the church, and I've talked to them at length and spent a lot of time there. They've invited me to stay over and have dinner, and I thought that might be a little bit of a stretch, but I've gone back to explore the humanity a little bit, because it's just people, right? You got one guy's law enforcement, one guy's good guy, bad guy. It's never that simple, or it's very seldom that simple. It's often more complicated. And I have established some kind of a relationship, I suppose, which I think is probably healthy. In my opinion, it is. But one interesting thing, they've told me I'm the only person from the federal side involved in the Waco incident that's ever been back there. Wow. And it's been 20 years now. I thought that was kind of unusual. Yeah.
In this series, the Thibodeau guy becomes one of the kind of main protagonists when they're following on the inside there. Have you met with him at all? Because I noticed he's popped up a lot in different interviews and things since.
Yeah, I've never met David. Love to sit and talk to him. I think he was in Waco one time when I was down there, but I can't remember why I didn't talk to him. But I haven't met all of those people. I've met people that were in there when it went down, and I've talked to them at great length. And then, I've got to say, in my experience, talking to them, they were very rational and measured in talking to me about my side. And, I forget how many people died there. It was 86 or 88, I think. It was a significant number of people died. And there wasn't an animosity. It was a very straightforward, matter-of-fact discussion. But I'll say the pastor now, I don't know if he's there today, but he was there 2 years ago, he said, listen, he said to me personally, he said, look, you probably struggle with this over time, which I didn't, but it makes sense, over this whole thing. And he said, look, I've got to tell you this. David Koresh and he were adversaries to a certain extent. They knew each other. The current pastor had broken away from David Koresh, Vernon Howell, whatever you want to call him. And he said, look, David decided this was going to happen. He saw this as his prophecy, and he made this happen. There was nothing the FBI or the federal government could have done any differently. This is what he orchestrated and wanted to happen. And I found it to be an interesting perspective that he took over the church with the mindset that David had to go this path. So I thought that was interesting.
Definitely. So do you have any pictures or video footage of you playing with them?
No.
I was going to say, if you did, please send that to me, because I'll pop it up in here, because that's just very interesting.
Look, I got to say this, and anybody watching this right now, I'm probably the oddest guy that ever made it to HRT. You know, it was one of the things that I did in my life, and I'm grateful that for a short period of time in my life, 10 years of my life, that I got to hang with some of the most remarkable human beings I've ever met in my life. And a lot of those guys, it was their world, and they do a stunning job of protecting people, and some of the most remarkable guys that I've ever had anything to do with in my life. And I'm talking the Army, Navy, and HRT. My life, it was part of something I did along the way. And I'm very grateful that I got to be part of that. But not a lot of guys playing rock bands with David Koresh's band haven't been there behind a rifle scope the whole time, you know. So my perspective is a little different. I'm sure people have different opinions on that, but I think I had, and to this day have, a pretty healthy sense of what happened, and I know other people haven't fared as well. A lot of people took it personally and felt very badly about the loss of life, and I deeply feel the loss of life, but I look at it in a slightly different context. I don't think it was the Janet Reno or Bill Clinton or David Koresh or David Thibodeau or or Gary Nesner or Dick Rogers or anybody involved in HRT. I don't think somebody made a bad decision after the initial shootout. Whatever happened, I'm not judging whatever happened between the ATF and David Koresh. But after the fact, the ultimate resolution that led to the loss of all that life, I don't think it was I think it'd be very, very complex discussion to assign blame. David Koresh killed those people and burned down the building. I watched him with my own eyes. There's no question. And people don't know that. They don't know that they shot hundreds or thousands of rounds at us that last day. I almost got shot. I almost got my head blown off the last day. It was different than people commonly accept, because it's more complicated than that. But I don't look at it and say the Janet Reno screwed up or Bill Clinton screwed up or it was just a very, very complex, very difficult to reconcile story in American history.
It seems like a lot of the story you see where everybody does documentary on this, obviously it tends to go towards the side of the Branch Davidians. And what I constantly see is talking about that last day. And I've heard from guys that, the Davidians were firing back or started firing first. Don't care on that right now. But the one thing you see is the IR footage from above, watching the tanks and small arms fire going towards the building. And you hear that story. And if I recall correctly, the Netflix series basically had the tanks pouring in gas. It catches fire. They didn't explain whose side set it on fire. And the Davidians basically, I believe, were pretty well full submit. And so, yeah, exactly. So can you you just like you just said, you almost got shot in the head. So I'm sure you're hearing the report of bullets and everything whizzing by you at times. Did you ever, were you able to ever identify the sound of small arms fire that's not anyone from your team, such as the very easy to distinguish sound of full auto AK fire? Anything like that that they would have used that was in fact full auto?
Well, first of all, it was very easy to distinguish because we didn't shoot back. I mean, I don't know what the Netflix series showed. We did not fire at the compound or anybody inside. We didn't, not around. Nor has that ever been, in all of the investigations, ever been alleged, or maybe they said that in a TV show. It's just not the case.
I don't think they show that in the show. That's going back to more of your old documentary where they show the IR footage and they're trying to show heat signatures and claiming that was whoever was basically doing I can't talk right now, the ground forces and everything that were with some of the tanks.
Yeah, so what happened is this. The last day we got the word, and we didn't get the word until 5 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And, you know, listen, people watching this will say, oh, you got this detail wrong or you get that detail wrong. Well, hell yeah, I do, because it's 20 years ago. But I wrote all the details down in great detail in that book that you referenced, which I wrote 20 years ago. I mean, it's an antique, but I'm not trying to sell books. I don't probably buy it for a nickel at a swap meet someplace. But I did write in very great detail, contemporaneous with that time in that book about what happened. So now I'm summarizing from memory, so I'm not talking about details, but I'll say this right now. We, the HRT operators who had the inner perimeter and were the only team involved, there were no sheriff's departments, there was no police, there were no other FBI agents, it was HRT. On the last day, the federal government, meaning Janet Reno and Bill Clinton, decided to attack or assault a compound. When they made that decision, we had tanks, and I'm not going to come up with some other name, they were tanks, but instead of having guns on the turrets, we'd affix these things to insert CS, military grade gas. And the idea was to get them to come out. And I think Janet Reno said she did it because they felt child abuse was going on or something. I don't know. I don't care. I didn't care at the time. All I know is they said go, and that's what we did. So I knew the guys driving the vehicles. I mean, we're brothers, right? There's only 50 of us. And we would go into the buildings with these armored vehicles, these tanks, and we would shoot gas. I shouldn't use that term, but we would inject whatever word you want to use. We poured gas into the building. When we broke the skin of the building, and we did drive those tanks into the building to insert first the boom and then started tearing down part of the building, the idea was if you insert gas, they are going to come out of the building and we're going to end this. That was the objective. Make them come out of the building. That's it. And that's what we did. The problem is David Koresh had made a plan with his guys at that point to light the building on fire when that happened. So we could see, I personally could see through my optics, and the guys in the tanks who were literally inside the building. I mean, they drove these vehicles. You can watch the video. Everybody who's interested to watch the video, and they can see Branch Davidians walking around with gas, pouring gas, and then lighting the fire. And if you watch the video, you can see a 40-mile-an-hour wind going right to left or left to right, and you can see the fire going the opposite direction because they started at one point and then they just walked down and started it. And in those who alleged that we shot them, I don't even know if I can say this because it's 20 years later, I guess nobody's going to come after me now, but I have photographs of skulls from the ashes with bullet holes in their heads. So there is no debate in the forensic examination of what happened at Waco, Texas, that they shot each other in the head and they burned the building down. The footage that you're talking about was shot from surveillance aircraft. It's black and white surveillance footage, and it shows flashes near the tanks from the ground. And in a lawsuit, the Branch Davidians tried to argue that was small arms fire from HRT who had dug into the ground and were shooting from sniper pits around the building. they being the federal government had a huge investigation. There was a civil suit. There was an enormous display of evidence, and I was part of it. And then CBS News did one of their own, and it was determined to be glint. It was something in the ground. It was water, or it was a bottle, or something like that, with the sunlight reflected. And in black and white surveillance footage shot from an aircraft, it appeared to be something that people interpreted to be muzzle flash. But then you can see in the video, if you watch it, you can watch the tank literally drive over the glint. So if it were small arms fire and somebody were lying on the ground shooting, a tank ran over their head.
See, and that's a problem with a lot of the footage now. And as I was trying to find that, and if anybody watching this video can find something, please add it in the comments, because I'd love to see more raw, uncut footage of that. Because most of what you see is just a little clip where they're showing it and they roll it back, they play it back, they play it back. So you don't get to see like what you're talking about. We don't have that perspective with what we can find on the internet now, which is really unfortunate, because it's just something that won't assist in that narrative at all.
Well, let me say, to qualify before you move on from that,
yeah,
I agree that you have to look at the evidence, not at a video documentary version of what they're trying to prove a conspiracy. Right? I personally have been part of probably 5 great American conspiracy theories. Ruby Ridge and Waco are 2 of them, but I've been part of a great number more. And I can say you can make anything look any way you want in terms of a conspiracy. And I would say to your viewers, don't listen to what I'm saying. I have a perspective. I think I'm right. I was there. I saw it. Still just a perspective, right? But I would say if you look at all the evidence yourself and make up your own mind, great. But the only thing I'll say as a qualifier to a certain extent is that through all of the Senate investigations, the congressional investigations, through all of the grand juries, through all the civil suits, the litigation, through everything, no one has ever shown anything different than what I'm saying right now. We, that last day, were told by our bosses to storm the building, whatever word you want to use, to enter the building and force everyone inside out to resolve the situation. That was the goal. We did that. They lit a fire and it burned down the building, and a great number of people lost their lives. And the entire time they were hosing us with automatic and semi-automatic small arms fire. I don't think they ever used the 50. I never heard what I clearly know to be the signature of a 50. I don't think they fired the 50 at us. If they did, we never found out the entire time whether or not those Bradleys would take a 50 round. But to the best of my knowledge, they never fired a 50, but they shot the shit out of us. And when I say I almost got shot, you and many of your viewers know that a supersonic rifle round at a certain point breaks the sound barrier. And when the projectile itself goes by your head, it sounds like a gunshot, right? That loud snap you get. Anybody who's been downrange or had a supersonic round go by their head, it sounds like, you know it. You can feel it. You can feel the overpressure, and it sounds like a firecracker going off in your ear. And I was standing next to a friend of mine at Sierra 2, standing higher than I should have because it was confusing at the time. And the round went right between the 2 of our heads. So 6 inches maybe. Yeah, they shot the shit out of us that last day.
Wow. And you'd said they had shot up like at the tanks and everything too, just pretty much shooting at anything and everything at that point. Yeah, it's wild. It's just anything, you don't see anything that really covers that or proves that. And I think that's what helps conspiracy support and everything definitely liven up a lot, is when people just don't see that stuff.
Yeah, and I don't have any photos I can show you right now, but I've got photographs of the aftermath where the federal government came in and they had so many expended rounds. And I think you can Google this. I think you can Google and see the reports that came out after the fact. But that the Branch Davidians had so many expended rounds that they had to use a front end loader to come in and take out all the expended rounds. I mean, I'm not talking hundreds, I'm talking thousands of expended shell casings from what they shot at us. I'm not saying I heard a lot of rifle fire. I mean, I've probably shot and been around as many expended small arms rounds as anybody. And like I said, we used to shoot 250,000, 300,000 rounds a year. I've been in gunfights. I've been in 4 war zones. I've been in, all I'm saying is I'm not talking about what I heard. I'm talking about what the government came in and took out of the ashes. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds of empty shell casings. And I think it's, you can probably find the photographs online. I know I have them.
Right. If there is, obviously, I don't want to get you in trouble with anything, but anything you can send me like that is part of conversation, I can insert those in here to where people can see them, whatever you're comfortable with sharing. Obviously, that'd be great to have stuff like that. But,
yeah, I do have those, and I will send them to you.
Great. Well, any last things you want to say on Waco?
No.
That's pretty okay. Well, post Waco, well, I guess, I know you talked about this in the book some, but you family and kids and everything, and you're away for 52 days, something like that.
Waco, you mean?
Yeah. You're gone.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't remember how long I was at Waco. I think it was 52 days. I think the thing was 51 days or something. I was there a day earlier. I'd been on a climbing trip before that. But when I was on HRT, I was gone an average of something like 310, 320 days a year.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
you're gone, some years you're gone all the time. And most of that time, if you ever deploy operationally, you don't get to tell anybody where you're going. So
Right.
I would just literally disappear and somebody would call my wife and say, hey, Chris is going to be gone for a while, but wouldn't know where I was. Sometimes I could call her and say hi. She would never ask. The wives never asked where you are or what you're doing or anything
Right.
like that. But, one thing about that book I wrote, that Cold Zero, I could only write that book about the non-classified things I did on the job. And the non-classified things that I did on the job were the least interesting and really the smallest part of what I did during my time on HRT. So people talk about Ruby Ridge and they talk about Waco or Talladega. They talk about the USS Cole bombing or the war in Kosovo or things that I did. But most of the time that I was gone were on something else, some sort of classified operation, some kind of rendition style for what people would understand a rendition style deployment. And some of those were quite lengthy. The lead up could be lengthy.
So how's that with the wife and kids?
It's a really interesting, anybody in a military family, even some law enforcement families, understand how difficult it is to come to terms with long deployments. I mean, some of the heroism involved in our veterans is just finding a way to live a life that's different. And when you go away, especially you go away to some kind of conflict, and with Iraq and Afghanistan, both Iraqs and Afghanistan, they were very, very long-term deployments. And it's very difficult to go back. You hang around with your buddies, it's a great world. I mean, I love that world. I really did. And there are very few responsibilities. You get to do remarkable fun stuff. Even the stuff that is not fun is incredibly intoxicating, I thought anyways, the real stuff. And when you go back and you hug your wife and your kids are yelling, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, would you bring me?" And she says, "I just got a new couch." It's tough coming out of a gunfight and making sense of the upholstery. It's a different perspective. So guys dealt with it in different ways. I think I've been very, very lucky in my life that I never really felt like I had any issues with it. But that being said, you go back and it is different. It really is going back to a day-to-day assimilation in a world that doesn't understand violence. And everybody deals with it with their own way. And you're talking about huge numbers of people that have served in the military in the last 20 years in harm's way. I mean, so many people know what I'm talking about and would not have known that. When I did that back in the 90s, I left in 2001. But when I did that in the 90s, nobody had that experience. I mean, the first Gulf War, I'm not belittling the experience for our armed forces in the first Gulf War, but it was not the second Gulf War, and it was not Afghanistan. It was different. And people, when I was going through that, There was just no reference base. Here's an interesting story about HRT in my time. The first 3 years I was on HRT, we never had an immediate action drill for casualties. If you went down on a hit, you stayed there. There was no emergency medical response. I mean, just think about that. Think about, any kind of tactical application in civilian law enforcement or in military law enforcement. You get a mission, you hit a building, and somebody goes down and nobody helps them. It was all mission. So that was a different mindset. And it was very difficult to bring that home. It was a different world in those days. I never really thought about that, but most people would find that appalling.
Right.
You talk about, you never leave a man behind or whatever else. Well, when I started out in that world, you just step over them. The mission was the only thing. So it was a different time.
Yeah. Well, so post Waco, I guess, following timeline, you continued with HRT for how long?
Well, I was a sniper on HRT for 6 years, and I needed a break, and I knew the day. I could tell you where I was. I could tell you what I was doing when I decided I had to take a break, and I did. So they sent me just across the street to the academy, and I taught interrogation for a couple of years, and I wrote the FBI. If you go to the FBI Academy, you don't take classes per se, you act out a play. It's a scenario-based training thing, and a lot of academies do that now. But you go to the FBI Academy today, you show up for class Monday morning, you're in a classroom and the phone rings. Somebody in the class answers the phone, and it's an actor reporting a crime, and you spend the next 18 weeks solving that crime. And it's really fascinating. So Quantico, Virginia has a whole cadre of actors, and you basically run a real world investigation, and you learn the core competencies along the way. So if you got to go out and do a search warrant, they teach you how to do it, but you actually do a search warrant. You got to arrest somebody, they teach you how to cuff, but then you actually have to cuff people. So it's pretty remarkable. I mean, you live an 18-week reality show. It's all scripted. It's a play. So I went and I wrote I guess I was the only guy in the FBI at the time that could write or something. I have no idea how I got that gig, but I did. So I spent 2 years doing that. Then I went back to the parent organization for HRT. I got promoted, and I went back as a supervisor. And it's called the Critical Incident Response Group, which is the parent organization for HRT. And then I did, so I was altogether it was 10 years. And then the world changed. So like I said, I was a writer that joined the FBI, not the other way around. And I don't know how this fits in with your viewers, but I was in a hotel room in 2001, in August of 2001, something like that. I was in a hotel room at the Mercer Hotel in New York City with some friends of mine and Brad Pitt. And we were in a party that certainly would have gotten me fired, probably prosecuted, end up winning $8,000 in cash, largely from Brad Pitt, and having tried to sell a book for a long period of time, didn't work out. But I won $8,000. I went out, I woke up the next morning, had a meeting, sold my first book, and decided to leave the FBI. Wow. And that was four months before 9/11. So in my life, it was a big deal. I had a great career in the FBI, 16 years, 17 years, something like that. And now all of a sudden, I sell my first book, and my life is changing. My dream is coming true. And I'm having all these crazy experiences. I was 3/4 nuts at the time. And so I sold the book, and I resigned from the FBI. And my last day in the FBI was September 11th, 2001. And my first book signing was September 12th, 2001, at the Barnes & Noble in the South Tower of the World Trade Center. And a friend of mine named John O'Neill, who was the world's expert on Osama bin Laden, and in those days it the UBL task force was run out of the New York field office of the FBI because we called him Osama bin Laden. John O'Neill had been running the coal investigation when I was in Yemen, in Aden, Yemen. So he got pissed off at the FBI. He retired, and he took a job as director of security for the World Trade Centers. And Tuesday, September 12th, was his first day on the job. September 11th, 2001 was his first day on the job. So I had done a book tour in London, and I flew back from London. I flew back from London to the FBI, back to Virginia on September 10th. September 11th, I went into my office to say goodbye to everybody and hand in my badge and hand in my gun. And that night I was going to get on a train and go to New York and have my book signing the next day at the South Tower of the World Trade Center. So I'm sitting there saying goodbye to all my buddies, and somebody points to the TV. I had an office with some TVs in it, and it was 9/11. So I just chose, through a sick twist of fate, to leave the FBI on September 11th, 2001. So you can imagine that sucked.
Yeah, that's insane.
Well, I still did. I still went to New York that night, and and then it got crazy. Then my life got crazy.
Was traffic nutty trying to get up there, or was it open or just normal? Or you went on train, right?
Yeah, I was on train. Yeah, it was the Amtrak train, and it was crazy. I mean, I remember coming around. I've taken that train a million times, but I remember when you get to a point where you can see the city and seeing the smoke rising out of what had been the World Trade Centers. And to know my buddy John O'Neill, who I was going to see while I was up there, was killed there. So people come up with all these conspiracy theories about 9/11. And I say there was one person that knew more about bin Laden and Al Qaeda than anybody else in the world. It was John O'Neill, and John O'Neill was killed in the World Trade Centers by Osama bin Laden his first day on the job outside the FBI. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
So anyway, so that because of the book, the world kind of needed somebody to talk about terrorism because nobody paid attention prior to that. And I became that guy. So I went to work for NBC, and I became the NBC talking head, whatever. So I did the Today Show and Nightly News, then MSNBC, which was early days of cable news. And then I got a regular job, my own show on CNBC with Martha McCallum, who's now at Fox. It was crazy. So, I went from the FBI to NBC. So I was on television every day. And if you write a book, you want a magazine to excerpt it because it helps with sales. And GQ magazine, of all things, ended up excerpting the book. So they put me on the masthead. So I wrote articles. I think I wrote 8 articles or something like that for GQ magazine. And then I got a contract with the New York Times, an op-ed contract with the New York Times. So I was living in New York, was on TV every day. I was writing books. I wrote 2 books. I wrote the first book, and then I wrote 2 more after that while I was in New York. And I was talking about terrorism on TV every day, which was a perfect cover for going back into the intelligence community and being very, very unhappy about the fact that I left the FBI the day 9/11 happened, which really sucked, gave me the opportunity to go back and do something very similar for the intelligence community. So I ended up back in Afghanistan 3 weeks after 9/11. I was there during Ramadan, right after 9/11. So I've seen the movie about the guys on the horses, what they call 13 horsemen or whatever.
Something like that, yeah.
I was there in northern Afghanistan, in the Swat Valley of northern Afghanistan, before they got there.
Wow.
Interviewing guys that some of whom ended up being part of the Northern Alliance. So that was pretty crazy. Went into Islamabad, and at the time you could go through, basically you could come in through Incirlik, Turkey, come down, or you could go into Islamabad and go north. And most people were going through the Khyber Pass. That became really bad. Some journalists were kidnapped or maybe killed. So I went north through Peshawar and north into the northwest frontier. That was some crazy shit, man. I mean, doing stuff with a team is one thing. Doing it on your own is a very, not on my own, but I mean, relatively speaking, on my own.
Right.
Was an entire, that was an escalation of what I had done before, significantly different, significantly crazier. And then I did one in Indonesia, and then I did one in Somalia. So I went, we can talk about it all you want, but in February of 2006, the US government found out that a lot of the bad guys were coming out of Afghanistan and Iraq. They were going through the Saudi Peninsula into Yemen and going across the Straits of Yemen into Somalia. It's only 22 miles wide. You can go through it with a fishing boat, right? Across the Straits of Yemen. And once I get into Somalia, there was nothing. Once we pulled out after the first battle of Mogadishu, the Black Hawk Down incident, once we pulled out from that, that was it. We really didn't have much of any assets in there. So the government came up with somebody came up with a plan to put together a government. They called it the Transitional Federal Government of Somalia. And it was mostly guys from Minnesota. They were Somali diaspora from Minnesota that the government stood up, flew to Nairobi, Kenya, put the government together there. And on, I forget, February 16th or something, I forget the date, they flew the government into a town called Baidoa, and which was nothing but a pile of rubble. I mean, holy shit. I mean, they had the opening ceremony for the government in a warehouse building that half the roof was blown off. So you're sitting in a warehouse as they stand up the government with half the roof is blown off, and it was just it was literally a pile of rubble. So anyway, I flew into Baidoa and I got stuck there. And I say, I don't know if it's true, but I suspect it's true, that I'm the only guy ever that fought his way into Mogadishu, not out of Mogadishu, because I had to get into Mogadishu in order to get out of the country. And
wow.
It's hard to put in perspective, but it got really hot. I went in with $10,000 in cash. I flew in on a twin-engine Cessna that I chartered and landed, got stuck there. And I was supposed to get out. There's a fleet of King Air aircraft that fly COT or Mira, that you've probably seen the stuff that they chew. But it has a shelf life of about 8 hours. So they would cut it, package it, bail it, put on these planes in Nairobi through, there's a civilian airport off the Nairobi airport. And this fleet of King Airs would fly it in these surrounding countries, and they drop off these bales of COT, and which is somewhere between dropping acid and chewing Copenhagen. And so the company was called Bluebird Air, and Bluebird Air would rent the plane in shifts, and one of the shifts was the distribution of the COT, and then the other shift was the CIA, or I'll say an intelligence enterprise, and that was my way out. But priorities changed and I got stuck there and I couldn't get out. So my only way to get out of the country, other than to walk, which was a long walk, was to get to Mogadishu. There was a charter plane that I had a rumor that this plane was there. And Nairobi Airport is nothing but an old Russian airstrip surrounded by rubble. There was a couple tents there, but you can go online now and look at it. It didn't look like that at the time. So you get a kick out of this. So I rent a car, and I had a full technical, right? So I got a Dushka 20 millimeter aircraft gun in the back that you see in all the movies. And Dushk is DSHK is the Russian weapon, but Dushka means sweetheart in Russian. So they all call them sweetheart. And then I had 3 chain gunners, and the rest of the guys had AKs. And I think the oldest guy in my crew was probably 17. I mean, there's no old guys there. They're all dead. And it was crazy. But anyway, so we decided to make a dash for Mogadishu. So I had my crew, and the driver, I was in an old Toyota sedan, and we're hauling ass to get to Mo because we didn't know when the plane was going to take off. And I had $600 left. That's all I had to my name. And I'd been hiding in a wall between a mosque and this, I don't even know what it was, some kind of a building, because I was hiding out not to get kidnapped. So anyway, the point of the story is that I get to the Mogadishu airport, and the back window of the car had been shot out. And we pull in, the driver's shitting himself. And I had my fixer with me who spoke the language, and all he wanted to do was get away. I ended up in this lot that was the Mogadishu airport. And I can see the plane in the distance on the runway. And it was one of those old DC planes that had the stairs that come down the back, like the DC Cooper thing that you see in the old movies where he parachutes out the back. Mm-hmm. So it was an airliner with the stairs that came down from the plane to the tarmac. And that's my ride out of town. So my fixer finds out that I can get a ticket. And so I say, how much is the ticket? And they said, well, how much do you have? And I'm surrounded by guys with AKs, right? Because I'm the only white guy in Somalia. And they're going, who is this crazy motherfucker? and I think to this day, the only reason that I'm alive, that I didn't get kidnapped, was because they were all trying to figure out who I'd made the deal with. Because this was a month before. This was about 5 weeks before the Second Battle of Mog. I mean, this was the start of the Second Battle of Mogadishu. It was very hot, and getting worse. And I think nobody knew who they knew who I was, because there was only one way I could be in the country, and they didn't know who had made a deal with me. And I think that's how I was alive. But anyway, the point of the story is that I'm standing in this lot. It's hot as fuck. I see this plane in the distance, and they say, and I want a ticket to get on that plane, right? Because I got no money. My technical's gone. I'm alone. And they say, how much you got? I said, $600. So they rifled through all I had was a backpack. They rifled through my shit, and I only got $600. So they take my $600 and they walk away. Now I see the plane. I'm surrounded by guys, not surrounded in a circle, but I'm surrounded by guys with AKs. They're all staring at me. And I got no money. I'm in Mogadishu, Somalia. I've already had the shit shot out of me on the way down, and I don't have a penny. So then they come back and they say, okay, we got a ticket. The pilot wants your passport. Actually, I don't know if they said the pilot. They said, we need your passport. And I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do? So I gave them my passport, and away they're gone. They're gone an hour. They're gone an hour and a half. And I'm standing there with no money, no water, no help, and no passport. And I thought, I got to stop doing this shit. It was, I think that was, of all the things I've been through over time, I think that was my most, that's when I said, you stop being an asshole. That was just stupid, just absolutely stupid. So anyway, eventually I got on the plane, and I got back to Nairobi, and then I flew back to the States, and I said, I need a war that I can survive. And then I flew to a place called East Timor, which was kind of a civil war going on at the time. So I flew to Darwin, Australia. I flew to Sydney and then to Darwin, and I spent about 7 years there in East Timor. And that kind of cured me of war. Yeah. 7 years in East Timor kind of cured me of war. So anyway, so that was my time after the FBI and HRT was vastly more interesting, I think, than my time when I was on it.
Is that stuff you could talk about?
I talk about anything, man. You ask me any question you want to ask me.
Well, how was Timor? What all were you doing there?
Well, when I got to Timor is a fascinating place. It's an island 600 miles north of Darwin, Australia. It had been part of Indonesia. It was a Portuguese colony from the 17th century, and somebody got the bright idea that they wanted to be their own country. So they voted to secede. Half the island stayed Indonesia. Half the island became a private company or an independent country. And Indonesia said, great, but watch this. They flew in and they killed a third of the population. They killed 300,000 to 400,000 people. They burned the country to the ground. And, when I was in Kosovo, Kosovo looks like the Sound of Music. I mean, it's the most beautiful Tyrolean Alps with all these chalets. And during the war, guys would just walk up with a thermite grenade and burn it down. I mean, just everything. It was a war zone. There's shit dead in the street. I mean, it's full on medieval. There's fires burning at night, like you'd see in any war zone, right? And but when I got to Timor, the Indonesian government, they even stole the phone lines and the power lines. They literally took down all the copper, rolled it up, and took it back to Indonesia. They burned the buildings. They completely leveled and destroyed the country. So the UN came in, tried to bring it back, and once they got it on the feet and left, then you saw a civil war between the military and the police, and that's when I went in. So when I went in, I got stuck in Darwin for, I don't know, 10 days when the airport was closed because of the fighting. And I finally got in, and the Australians were leading an international force. But there's tanks in the streets, and there's fire teams walking up and down, Australian Army fire teams walking up and down the street. And I always said that living in East Timor was the only time in my life when I had a white star cluster go off over my house, right? I got illumination flares going off over my house because of the fighting around it. So it was a crazy time. And I started a security company. I started a company called APAC Security. And I went down there just with a couple people, they're as crazy as I am, I guess. And and we built it to 4,000 people. So by the time I left, you couldn't live in that country unless you paid me, paid whatever. We had a coup d'etat. I woke up on 7 o'clock in the morning, and the prime minister's oldest son, Nito Guzmão, worked for me. He was my top local guy. Prime minister's son, and he called me up and he goes, "Sir, I regret to inform you," and Nito never said sir. I mean, we were buddies. And he said, "Sir, I regret to inform you the president has been shot." And I said, "Shot?" I mean, there's this guy named Horta who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And there was this guy up in the mountains in the jungles, this gorilla, and he came down and he shot the shit out of the president. And he attacked Nito's dad's house, the prime minister's house. His dad escaped. And so I woke up to a coup d'etat, which was interesting. And I was bigger than the army. I had the entire UN, and I had basically every expat. So we had Schlumberger, we had ANZ Bank, we had most of the expat community. We secured all their personnel and all their things. So you wake up 7 o'clock in the morning before you had a cup of coffee, and you find out that the country is in the middle of a coup d'etat. That was interesting.
Yeah.
So Timor was, there was a pretty interesting documentary. I think it's on Netflix called Balibo, and that was just before I came in, and it was wild, man. I mean, New Year's Day 2008. Just to give you an example, I'm sitting at my desk, kind of like you are, and I had a big desk. And there was a window to the left, and it was in a compound. Everybody lived in compounds. So you have everything's inside a 12-foot wall. So my security company had a big compound and guards everywhere. And I was sitting at my desk, and I heard a commotion, New Year's Day. And I looked to my left, and it was probably, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 feet to the wall, which is a window. And then just on the other side of the wall, so probably 6 feet away, one of my guards pulled out a machete and chopped another guy's head off right outside my window.
Wow.
And those are the good guys, right? Those are my guys. So living and working in an environment like that creates a lot of challenges. It's pretty crazy things. And it was all black magic. So we secured the Australian Federal Police. We secured their compound. And I got a call one day from the colonel, and he said, "Hey, we got a problem. I don't know what it is, but you better get over here." So I ran over, get inside the compound, and go up to my lead guy. And he said, "Boss, we got a big problem." "Okay, what is it?" He said, "We need backup. You got to get some help over here." And I said, "All right, cool. What is it? What's the situation?" And he said, "One of the guards on duty found a ghost in the well, and we got to exorcise it. We got to get that ghost out of there." And I thought, all right, cool. What do we got to do? So we got to get a chicken and a left-handed dog and 3 old boots or something. And so we found all this shit, and we had a ceremony. And we got rid of the ghost, and everybody high fives, and I go back to drinking beer.
Wow.
It was a whole different world, man. Crazy.
Yeah. That's nuts.
So that was the next stage, and that was I think I was there about 3 years, and then I moved to Bali and surfed for 3 years just to try to work it off. But all in, it was 6 or 7 years, I guess, altogether that I was in Asia.
Do you know Dale Comstock?
I don't think
Delta
so.
Guy. I think Bali is where he's at. I can't remember. I don't know him or anything. I see his post because he was involved in some controversial stuff. I believe. I think it was an assassination attempt for the country of Jordan. It was about 3 years ago, and well, it got filmed, and
That's bad. That's
And
bad.
things went south, and yeah, so he was trying to explain. It may have been the UAE that was paying for the hit. I don't really remember, but there's alleged blessings of the United States and whatnot to do that. But and I just started following him after that just to follow the drama. But crazy
You know,
world.
it's a crazy world now because everything's on film, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Back in the day, there were no cell phones. I mean,
right.
nobody shot anything. I mean, everything was he said, she said. Now, absolutely everything you do is on film.
I remember the first day I was being filmed in a uniform. It was weird. Somebody's out there with their little Sony Handycam with the little night vision button, and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it was when I first started. It's pretty funny. Like again, pretty small agency. You're familiar with the area on that, but this is 2007, so too late for tech like this. But I go and check my box, and there's a floppy disk in it, and I'm like, "Ha, that's funny." And the guy's like, "That's for your reports." I'm like, "That's hilarious." And he's like,
Yeah,
"I'm
right,
not
right.
joking." And I look at it; it's got my badge number written on it. I mean, we at this time it was pretty common to find probably 2 to 8 gigabyte thumb drives, and they're still issuing
Isn't that
flop.
crazy? Look,
Yeah.
like I'm this is you you'll call me a liar over this, but when I joined the FBI in the late 1980s, the FBI fingerprint files, all of them, everything was
Mhm.
on 3x5 index cards. They were not computerized. The
That's insane.
FBI, I'll say that again, the
Yep.
FBI fingerprint system had not been computerized when I joined the FBI in the 1980s. Granted, I'm an old guy, it's a long time ago. It's not that goddamn long ago. It is, it's, it's appalling how bad some things are. People think it's all Jason Bourne and
Right.
you know, high speed, lightweight gear.
It's like hackers
It's
in
not,
DOS mode.
yeah, that's exactly right. Hackers in DOS mode.
Yeah,
That's right.
what's interesting to me is, see, 10 years ago, I was trying to work into film stuff and everything, so I got some background in that, went to school, and that's part of why I was out in California. And it has been insane from when I decided to launch the YouTube and everything, just seeing the tech change there. The tech change we see in weaponry. Like, look at the basic M4 packages, that we started these 20-year wars with and where they've come. Like, it's insane. And
Yeah.
the lights, like, I started off with I think 160 lumen light, and it was hot shit back then. Like to have 160 lumens. And the other day, I just put 1,000 lumen light on a pistol, and about a year ago, I bought a 1,500 lumen light for my rifle. It's
Yeah.
nuts where it's gone.
It is nuts. And I go back, those communities stay pretty close and they support the old guys.
Yeah.
And so I go back to HRT from time to time, but it's staggering what they have for resources. I mean,
Oh, I bet.
it's unbelievable. When I was on the job, I would always say I don't want anything with a battery in it because it would always die, it would always go bad. Now you can't have coffee without a battery in it. I mean,
Right.
the technology is astonishing. Here's a kind of a funny technology story though that I just thought about. You might find interesting. Um, on HRT, in most of the community, you have side projects, right? For when you development projects, and so if you're a sniper and you're shooting from an unstable platform at a moving target, incredibly difficult. Moving targets tough, unstable platforms tough. You do the two, and it's really really tough, right?
Right.
So we were trying to figure out a way to stabilize a shooting platform from a helicopter because you got a bungee mounted 60 with a door gunner. That's fine for suppressive fire, but that's not a CT tactical operation
Right.
shot, right? So I had a buddy, the Brad Pitt story. I had a buddy who's a movie director who had steady cams that were taking camera shots from boats and helicopters. And I said, well, how do they do that? So I found out this guy that invented the steady cam had a lab, had offices in Burbank, California. So I fly out to LA, go up to Burbank, meet the guy, incredible guy. He also invented the jetpack and just a fascinating guy. And so I ended up he would use a flywheel to through inertia, create artificial mass. You're going down a motorcycle, going down the road, it doesn't want to turn left or right. That's just inertia of the flywheel, the wheels. So he would take a 10-pound wheel at a certain number of RPMs, and it would generate 800 pounds of artificial mass. So you hang a platform beneath a little bird, and it would stabilize the shooting platform. So we built this platform with this gyro stabilized shooting platform with a solenoid that you could trigger, and it became a really cool thing. But people flipped out. They thought the technology was ridiculous, and where'd you get this idea? That was the thing. Now that's
right.
That's ancient, but at the time it was a big deal.
I'm trying to see if I've got one. I know I've got one nearby. It's insane to me just seeing it. Yeah, it's across the room. But yeah, the camera gimbals for phones, like just little handheld guys this big and perfectly steady. I mean, honestly, the camera I've got over here right now, it's on one that's a little larger. And that was the first one I got, but it's amazing just the tech there with what they're able to do. And it's funny you're basically saying you guys had that, because I was talking to friends a few years ago, like, why don't we have gimbal-like devices in the top of, trucks with any type of guns and everything mounted on top, helicopters, like the works? It just seems to make sense because it's phenomenal. And drones have them built in. There's a gimbal right there, and your camera's perfect, stable footage. It's beautiful.
Well, that brings up a good point. I don't think anybody's ever come up with a commercial application, and I'm sure one of your guys has come up with the idea. I mean, it's cheap, it's incredibly effective, and you want to put together a stable shooting platform on anything that moves. Nobody's ever done it. We did it.
As light as they're able to get it, I gotta grab one to show you. It's stupid how small these are. Give me a second. All right. But that's all this is. This is one of the smaller ones I have. Mount up the phone right stabilized? Here. Yeah. And I've got an extra phone here. And you just snap this sucker in. I say that as it doesn't want to snap in. I may have to take the case off to get this one. Oh, well, bad example. But anyways, yeah, you just shove the phone in. Oh, I'm pulling the wrong spot. There we go. Got to be smarter than the gimbal. I think I haven't used this one in forever. It's on.
That's wild. I can't believe you get them.
There we go.
That's what a trip,
and it just turns, and I've got my phone in upside down. But yeah, like I can take this thing and be pretty wild with it. I can select your face on it, and you could be moving on the screen. It'll watch you on the screen, and my phone will automatically just follow you wherever you go. I mean, and it's $130. It's just wild.
I hope somebody watching this puts a barrel on that thing and an adapter for a four-wheeler. I mean, yeah, it's a great application.
Yep. So to me, it just I was talking to a buddy about it as he's continuing to describe what it's like with the moving one of the 240s up on top of the trucks back when he was at the FastCat team with Blackwater. And he's talking about you kind of throw your ass into it and swing the gun around, but
I think I lost you somehow.
Let me know when you get back.
Well, you were back. I got your vocal. Yeah, I got you back now. Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, he was basically talking about all the weight shift and throw you got to use to swing your butt around in order to bring that 240 around. And that was something like after he was on the podcast as well, actually. And afterwards, we're talking outside. I'm like, man, there's got to be a way with seeing how the gimbal tech has come and how far it's come. Just again, in the time that I've known about it, really just in the last 15 years, it's wild. And I don't see why you can't apply the same thing there. And I will say, this channel.
I was going to say, I built.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to step. No, I was just going to say, well, we built one in 1995, so
yeah. I
mean,
was it just not cost effective then, or people didn't care, didn't see a need for it?
No, I don't know. I don't know how long they used it. Maybe they still use it. I have no idea. But it was a funny thing. First of all, I left, and once you leave, I had other shit going on. So I don't know what happened with the project, other than the fact that it worked for a while. Yeah. But it was funny. This scientist, I think he passed away, but he is a fascinating guy. And we're talking to him. We do the whole thing. We write the check. And he said, let me guess, I'm going to get a check from UPS in Des Moines, Iowa, and I have to destroy all the blueprints, right? And I started laughing. I said, this isn't your first gig. And he said, no, I know you guys. So, these something. Here's another funny story about, since we talking about all these crazy things, DARPA, right, along the same lines. That's just what we did. But DARPA, Defense Advanced Research, I think they've gone back to just calling it ARPA now, but military research organization, they showed up one day for us to test an invisible suit. They had a sniper suit, a ghillie suit that would make us invisible. And it was pretty good. I mean, we worked on it for quite a long time. I don't know whatever happened to that either, but it was pretty cool. It was light fiber and cameras. So you wear a ghillie suit it was kind of like fur, but it was light fiber, and had cameras, and it would measure your environment, and it would feed it through the light fiber to make you invisible. And wow. It was pretty cool. I mean, it was a long time ago, so maybe they have something much, much more advanced now, but in the 90s, I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah. I remember, like, I'm not really big into hunting. My family is, and I've hunted some here and there over years and everything from that. And of course, obviously, there's crossover within the community once you're into firearms. And I just remember being blown away by just one of the dumbest, simplest concepts ever for a hide for hunting: mirrors leaning forward that just reflect the ground right in front of you. And it's all it is. It's mirrors. Just like if you're looking at them, it's mirrors, and they're just angled down like this to where they create a blind pointing just whatever the ground is, it's reflecting it. So it's perfect camouflage in any environment. You match it perfectly. You're looking directly at the same thing. Like, yeah, you may change the layout of the way things turn, but it was a great idea. But I think it's mirror blind or something like that. But just pretty cool stuff.
Well, so there's some amazing stuff that people have come up with. I don't know what doesn't get broader application, but that's a fantastic idea.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
Yeah, and I remember a buddy of mine, his hunting buddy, who showed it to me, and he's like, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna make my own." I don't know if he ever did or not, but
it's cool.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to throw in? I've got one good question regarding guns.
Yeah, sure.
What's your favorite handgun?
Yeah. I like Kimber products, and I like 45s because that's what we carried. So I'm a single action guy. And 45, but I have so many guns, man. I'm not a gun nut, but I think after I got off the job, I didn't own a gun for quite a long time, and I have a lot of them. So when it comes to a concealed carry, I like that Kimber Ultra with an extended grip. I have a big hand, so I like a short barrel and a big grip. So my primary carry is a stainless Kimber Ultra with the extended mag and the extended mag grip. I think it's called an X grip. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, that's the perfect gun. But I also like a Glock 43X, and I'm a huge fan of some of the M&P shields. I think if you get one of the custom guns that has the night sights imported, sometimes need a little trigger work, but I'm a huge fan for the price point. So I love M&P. I carry 40. I've never been a big fan of 9mm, but everybody's gone to it now. We used to carry, when I was on HRT, we had this guy named Les Bear make, he was, I think he still makes guns. Great guy.
Oh, yeah.
Still makes guns. And, but we had all these double stacked high-end 45s and comp guns, and they were great guns, but they're heavy as a brick. They're just a huge pain in the ass. But anyway, I got big on 45s. But now everybody in the community I know carries 9mm because you get so many rounds. You get some pretty good, these new SIG rounds are fantastic. And it's placement and ammo, right? So, battle gear has always been about 45 pounds, whether it's a shield and a broadsword or whether it's high-speed, lightweight gear, it's still 45 pounds. You got a hump. And that's not the hump in, that's just going through a door. And so it's ammo, food, shelter, food, water, shelter, right? And 9mm ammo's lightweight. You can fit a lot in a magazine. Mm-hmm. And so I'm starting to think more about 9mm, and I love that 43X. It just fits my hand. It's a great weapon. I love the fit and I like the M&P shield for the price point. I don't see how you go wrong. But I remain a 45 guy, probably a dinosaur, but I like it. So I carry a Kimber Ultra with an extended mag, that X grip extended mag. And I like those SIG rounds, the SIG defense rounds.
Well, I feel for the dinosaurs out there because now what I carry, everyone calls an antique gun, or at least all the younger people do, but it's SIG 226. Those double action, single
Yeah, yeah,
actions. It's weird. It's
yeah.
becoming a thing of the past as everyone's moving into plastic guns and striker fired. And yesterday, I actually just took about half day of a course. Jumped in with a buddy down there at APT, and I finally decided I'm going to grow up and start carrying a 43X.
Yeah.
And try those out,
It's a great
especially with
gun.
the shield mags holding 15 rounds in the gun. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But so yeah, ran
Volume.
through the class using those mags, using the gun. Basically, had a flawless day with it, and I guess I'm going to try and well, the biggest thing now, if you're going to work professionally and carry a gun, if you're at a place where you don't have the ability to carry what you want, it's a Glock 19. Like that's pretty much it. And just even
Yeah,
like
that's right.
looking into some of the contract world and everything, it seems like Constellus and Triple Canopy are two of very few companies that even allow a SIG anymore. Some companies allow a Beretta, and everyone else is just like, nope, Glock 19, period. Like that's all you get. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to beat. Everybody's got opinions. Firearms are probably the most talked about, the most opinionated subject in the history of the world. But SIG's a great company. I love SIG. I like their 1911 packages. I like, and what's the? I bought the little holdout 300 blackout. Is it called a Rattler?
Yeah.
Yeah, I bought one of those. That's what I keep in my go bag. So I keep I love 300 blackout. When I was on HRT, we were running CQB with 226, and I mean, just the overpressure is brutal. But you run that Rattler with subsonic ammo, it's just a great weapon. I'm a huge fan of SIG. I'm not. I always thought their handguns were top heavy, and I was never really a SIG handgun guy. But I'm a huge fan of the company.
Tall.
Yeah, heavy and they're tall.
Yeah.
But you know, I always look at firearms as you do, as tools, and I live on a ranch in Montana, and my biggest problem is snakes. So most of the time I carry a little 5-shot Chief Special with snake ammo. You know, I mean, if I'm going up on the hill, just on the odd chance, like I see, I've got a wolf up here. I'm kind of buddies with this gray wolf that I see all the time. So I wouldn't shoot him if he tried to eat me. I probably wouldn't shoot him, but but I usually go snake shot, 38 plus piece, snake shot, 38 plus piece. So if I'm on my horse, it fits on my saddle, and if I'm riding, it's a great weapon. But so it depends on the application. But if I'm going someplace where I need a handgun for personal protection, I'm still 45.
Yeah. Well, not to hate on you at all, but I will say there's a guy in the class running a 1911. It choked a lot yesterday.
Yeah.
But
Well, you know, Kim is a good. I mean, everybody likes their own thing, right?
Yeah.
And I've got a great armor. I got a great gunsmith in town, and fixes anything. But I've never had a problem feeding. I have the larger one too. What the bigger one's called a. They've all got crazy names.
Right. I can't keep them
The
straight.
full size Kimber. I don't know what. It's a custom shop gun. It's a nice gun. It's an expensive gun. And I started reading all these things where people said failure to feed and all this. I've never had a miss of any kind. So
I had a Grand Raptor 2 from Kimber.
yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah,
Raptor.
I had one of those. It was great. The only thing I ever had as an issue with it is, and I got rid of it shortly after. Not really just because of this, but I just was going a different direction. But as a lefty, that safety, the way they do that safety, I was getting a half step off, which allowed the gun to fire, but wouldn't allow the slide to cycle.
Wow,
So
really?
I had to go on top against the frame hard and mash down to make sure I was clearing that. And I was just catching that first half click there. That just kind of became a problem for me. And I had a buddy who was wanting it, and we ended up working out a trade deal and stuff around that time. So
Yeah.
but yeah, outside, I mean, it always went bang when I needed it to. And
Yeah. Never had a problem with it.
yeah,
I do like stainless guns, and the 43X I have two of them. One is all blue, or is powder coated black or whatever. But one appears to have a stainless slide. But I think it's just great powder coated.
there's a little story behind that. So they were making the 19X to get the military contract, right? To do all the tan guns and everything. And they thought they had it in the bag. Well, they didn't get the gig. And like, well, what are we going to do with all this PVD finish? So the base coat of the PVD is that silver, and they shot that on the 43.6s, and that's why it's a weird, really light, almost whitish colored silver. It's just the base coat
that's
of
right.
PVD.
Get out of here. That's wild, man.
Now, here's
Wow.
another thing. If you got one of those, I'd advise getting rid of it eventually. And the reason is the silvers are technically generation 1. They've done a generation 2 with a slight variance in the mag change. Ended up learning that from the Shield guys that made the magazine, because they actually had to delay part of their release because they had to go back to the drawing board where the black slide guns came out with a slightly different magazine release setup. So
Wow.
thought that
I haven't
was
even noticed.
interesting. And the
I've got one
silver
of these.
slides, I guess they're going to be done here soon. We're going to go ahead and nix that whole program with the silvers, and I've heard rumors that the 48 is also going to be kicking the curb as well. So to just be the 43X.
Right.
But
it's a great platform. It's a great system, if you ask me. Overall.
Oh yeah, it's again, being a classic P Series SIG guy, I wish SIG could do the same thing with that rather than just the polymer 365. But what Glock made with the 43X and paired with the Shield mags holding 15+1, and now they have a +5 extension port, so 21 rounds. I think, given some time, I'm already seeing detectives carrying it as a primary weapon, and I mean that's ultimately it's going to turn into a duty gun. It's too new and too weird to a lot of people, but we're looking at making our flashlights smaller, all of our gear smaller, to where we can fit more stuff on us and everything. And I think you're going to see the same thing when people actually are pretty well solid and efficient with a small gun like that. It's meeting such a cool world there in between the micros and subcompacts with actual compact or above capacity. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, and people talk endlessly about all these different things with guns, but people say, concealed carry, which is at this point in my life all I really pay attention to. If it's a small gun and it's got 5 rounds in it and I'll carry it, it's still better than having this tricked out comp gun that I look at and say it's great, but it's too heavy, it's going to pull my pants down, whatever else, right? So, it's all applications, it's all tools, but I think that 43X is a great intermediate step. I mean, it's lightweight, it fits anything. Anyway, I like that, and I like that Shield. The Shield's a cheaper gun, but I've never had a problem with mine, and I like it. So,
I think this is a friend of mine. I think it was Steve Collins that told me this, I believe, first. But when recommending a first gun to somebody, it's pick a gun that you'll actually carry every single day and make that.
I think that's the key.
Yeah,
I think it's a key. It's something that you'll carry.
Yep, and a lot of people don't have a large range queen and they don't carry it, and then something happens and they wish they would have had it, and then they'll carry it for a week or two, and then normal world again, and then it goes back into the safe or bed stand, whatever the case may be.
You got to have it, man. It's not going to do any good unless it gets something. So people can say what they want. If you carry a concealed weapon, it's got to be something you'll carry, right? I'm with you. I agree with you 100%. Yep. And then in ARs, I got a million different ARs, and my favorite AR is an AK. I've got an AK that is tricked out, and it's got an 8-inch barrel, and that's my bug out. Yeah. It's a pistol, right? It's got a folding grip, so the whole thing is this long, and it is a monster. I mean, every place I've ever been. And I've been in considerable number of combat situations. There's something about the sound of a 9, then the sound of a 45, then the sound of an AR, and then the sound of an AK. And there's just something reassuring about that boom in my mind. So listen, I know guys carry a million different things, and we could have talk about it till the end of the time. But anytime I could, I wanted a 308 size. Boom, and 7.62 is a good caliber.
Yep,
I think, anyways. So
nope, I definitely agree. I tried carrying AK, or wanted to go to one as kind of a primary rifle choice for a long time, and eventually grabbing up a rifle, just the ability to connect things, put them where I want exactly, and tweak all these weird angles. The options are just so unlimited on an AR, whereas the AK just has a little bit of tweaking involved that can be a little more difficult to get there.
Yeah, but I don't carry anything. I'm old school, and you kind of go with what you grew up with. But even on my I have one SIG Romeo red dot on one of my ARs. Everything else is bone stock.
Yeah.
Not bone stock. I mean, they're stripped down. I don't have a bunch of lights and lasers and everything else that people bolt on these things. But, you know, it's personal preference. And the great thing is you can talk about weapons till the end of time. Everybody's got an angle, right?
Yep. One of my favorite rifles to shoot, period. Old 2006 build Olympic Arms, fixed carry handle upper, plastic 4-end, 16-inch, and I have gaff taped a Surefire to the side of it. And,
Yeah, right.
and I'm
Right.
a left-handed guy, and I still gaff taped it for a right-handed shooter because it's battlefield pickup. And you know what's funny is I showed up to a rifle class with that gun, and I told the instructor, hey, just so you know, my rifle's not sighted in because I'm training for more of a pickup scenario. And he was like, cool. And it was just kind of fun getting out there, and you know, people are formulating the opinions, whether they're speaking out loud or thinking in their head. But you know, they're up there laughing as I'm like, miss, start shooting around the clock, finally get my hits. And after that, I only struggled a little bit once we got out past 220 yards, where I was having trouble finding it, and I probably got about my third hits there. But outside of that, just smashing steel all day with a weird offset, just dealing with it.
That's cool as shit.
It's fun.
You know what I use a lot out here? I'm a huge fan of 3030 because I grew up in northern New Hampshire with open sights. Right, I still love open sights on a cowboy gun. I mean, it's kind of a cowboy lifestyle up here. And but I've got a stainless steel Marlin lever action 4570, and it shoots 450 grain bullets.
Yeah.
And you know, I think they call it a Montana guide gun. Everybody around here does anyway. But you can't go wrong. And never rusts. It shoots golf balls. It's a synthetic stock. It's just a great weapon, absolutely great weapon. So all the gas guns and 30-round magazines and everything is great, but sometimes the right gun is an old school lever action.
Yep. I've got an old Marlin 3030.
Yeah, I love them.
Yep. Well, last thing before I let you go, music. You mentioned playing guitar and everything, so I'm assuming music's a pretty big part of your life too.
Yeah. Yeah, I've played in bands since I was a kid. I had a band even, I guess I never had a band on HRT, but most of my life I've had a band and I have a great band now. It's a cover band, but yeah, I love it. I mean, a couple of years ago, we got a tour bus and we played Memphis and Nashville, Tulsa, Springfield. We played the whole Midwest. So it's just fun. I don't do it for a living, but I love it. And I'm a guitar nut. I have far, far, far more guitars than I have guns. And it's one of those things. Everybody needs something in life to I'm not running IPSC matches anymore and doing combat shooting as much. But I still love guitar. I think it's been a really therapeutic thing over the years. I had a band in Timor, had a band in Bali. I've had a band since I've been out. And I think and recommend to people I talk to, young guys coming up. Like I got a buddy now at 6, a very close friend of mine at 6, and he's a commander now, but he's come up, and so he's always asking me what's next. You know, what's going to happen here? What's going to happen there? And he's got such a great head, so much combat, and he's still in it. What's next? And I think it's really important for anybody in harm's way to have something they can turn to that's totally opposite. Yeah. And you and I know that life, and you and I love firearms and the mechanism of that life. But I really think it's important long term. When you get to be my age and you've done that for a long period of time, I think the guys who do really well with it are the guys who have something totally off grid. You know, a lot of guys play golf, but having something I think is important. For me, it's been playing in a band.
I cannot remember the guy's name. I can't remember the name of the podcast he was on, but it's Metal something. He brings, I don't even know what the point of his podcast is, if it's more music or more about military stuff, or if this is just a random guest because he's a musician. But the guy, he was I believe Ranger on the ground during Mogadishu, the whole Black Hawk Down incident. Later went on to CAG and eventually got out. I think I don't remember. It doesn't matter the story there. But yeah, he talked about how big and important part of his life music was, and how that kind of became his thing to settle. And one really interesting thing that he was talking about was how he got to stay in, like after pretty much starting out, going to Mogadishu, seeing all the craziness, watching one of his best friends getting killed right in front of him. And a lot of guys got injured, messed up enough to where they're done. They're, medical discharge done. And how they were messed up in the heads and everything because they didn't get to stay in like he did and get to process and see how that's not how things were supposed to be. That's not normal, And it was just really cool. And he talked a lot about mindset and how basically being able to stay in helped kind of catch him up, find reality, and same thing, music. So that's obviously a total mess up here as I'm rearranging stuff.
Oh, man. Oh, wow. Look at that, dude.
A big part of my life. I'm a drummer. Started off on guitars, but drummer, that's another LA part of my life was music. So
yeah,
is it what you got over there?
Well, I got 4 guitars, a bass, and a drum set.
Nice. I thought I was seeing a drum set.
Yeah, I'm a guitar player who loves to play. I'm a guitar player who loves to play drums. I'm with you, man. Listen, there's something about it. You got to let that shit go somehow, and it's a good release. Always has been for me.
Music, it's so interesting. I can't even explain it. It's you either feel it or you don't. You know what I mean? And just being able to dive in it that way that I think musicians can. I think a lot of non-musicians may unfortunately not be able to feel that. But the ones that do, like, it's hard to find things that are more powerful than that. And being able to connect with something on that level is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Well,
all right, man. Well, it's fascinating talking to you.
Yep. It's been a blast, and I'm sure we'll reach out and get something going in the future. And if you're back in town, definitely let me know. I'd love to grab a meal, grab a beer with you. Heck, maybe even have a jam session.
That'd be awesome. I got more shit in Springfield.
All righty. And your books, real quick, what other ones do you have that's out? The people who've got Cold Zero and... Yeah,
so Cold Zero I wrote because it's a memoir of those days, right? It's an antique now, but it's listen, I'm an antique, right? So I talk about the history of this stuff. It's good to have, in my opinion, it's good to have perspective about how we got where we are now. Everybody is faster and sharper and more war stories and all of that. But I think there's some value in going back and looking how it started.
100%.
So that's Cold Zero. But I could only write about non-classified stuff. So I wanted to write a memoir about the classified stuff. So the next book is called Black, and it is a novel. It's a fictionalized version of the stories I couldn't tell. And then the book after that's called White, which is a sequel. So it's Cold Zero is the first book, nonfiction memoir. Black and White are 2 novels about the classified side of what I did. And then the 4th book is called Rumney Common, which is about a Secret Service agent. And now I'm working on a Civil War Western, total departure, but really a different type of story.
Yeah. What the Black, White, and the other one, I'm sorry I didn't catch the title. Are those available on audio as well?
Yes. Yeah. I think so. I mean, we're talking about a long time ago. I published my last book in 2007, I think. So I should have stayed writing books. I decided I want to go back to war. Right. And now at this point in my life, now I'm coming back to the writing, and that's what I was born to do.
Yeah.
So I'm working on
that. That's awesome.
Now.
Well, I'll post some links and everything. If you got specific links where you want those to be picked up, if anybody's wanting them, let me know, and we'll put those down below the video so people can check it out. I know Cold Zero's right there on Amazon, or not Amazon, iTunes is where I got it. I always listen to stuff on there. And it was cool that you read it. Like, I love that when an author actually reads their own book, because
that was fun. That whole experience was fun. But when it comes to the books, when you write a book, you got to pimp it. And I used to go on TV, and I was on every show and always pimping books and stuff like that. And the great thing about talking to you now in this is I'm not trying to get a single goddamn thing. I don't have any social media, not selling books, I'm not doing anything. And there's a bit of freedom in that. So I appreciate the thought.
Huge.
Zero, which
amazing.
Is great. Yeah, for now anyways. All right, brother, man, it was really, really interesting talking to you.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate you having you on. And again, I'll reach out. We'll stay in touch, and probably see you here in the near future.
We'll do. All right, man.
We'll see you.
Take care. Bye.